Hello.
Well,
We're all
hello.
here. Hi, I'm surprised that we already have like 6, 7 people watching currently. Didn't expect that.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hello, and welcome to a special stream that we decided to do once we found out that Adnan Syed got out of prison after 23 years. So we're here to talk about that tonight as wrongful conviction aficionados. I don't even know if that's the right word. I don't even know. I know Juliet and I are into it. I don't even know where Alex stands as far as that kind of thing goes.
Well, I mean, I guess the justice system should be about finding the truth, and if they got it wrong, they got it wrong. And especially if they got it wrong through unethical means, then yeah, I'm not happy about it.
Yes, yeah, and that's why I mean, I've said it a few times on air before too, and then probably off air a lot, but how much I really dislike the justice system because I do not think it is just. And from listening to these podcasts a few years ago, that's what really woke me up to wrongful convictions are a thing. And I never really thought about it. And once I did, it makes me incredibly sad. Hello, your friend Paul, Keith the Hat Guy, and Winky Winky Woo. Oak Eye, the new lassies. I don't even, what does this say? Oh, God, he's Scottish, so I don't, it's just a different language here.
He is.
So we three all re-listened to Serial, right? I think we all finished that. And then I was able to listen to all, except for like the PCR hearing stuff of Undisclosed podcast. And then you guys worked your way through at least some of it, majority of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I got like halfway, and then today I started bouncing around to other podcasts that have talked about it to see if anybody had any different insights.
Okay, yeah, because you mentioned Serial, I think, and I still haven't checked that out. The other one I know is Truth and Justice. That started off as Serial Dynasty, but I'm gonna finish listening to everything. I watched the first 2.5 episodes of the 4-episode docuseries of the case against Adnan Syed, so I haven't finished that. But I was trying to take notes throughout all of these things too. So I don't know. Do either of you want to talk about who Adnan Syed is and what happened to him? I don't know if you guys have a better... I can summarize stuff, but not as well as probably either of you can.
Okay, so Adnan Syed, he was 17 years old. He went to Woodmore High School in Baltimore.
Woodlawn
High School. And it was in January? January 13th. His ex-girlfriend, Hae Min Lee, went missing. 28 days later, her body was found. Is that right? Or was it?
I think it was 6 weeks later that they found her, at least from what they kept saying. I don't know. I don't remember the exact date, though.
Oh, Keith the Hat Guy has no idea what the story is. I don't know how to, where do you start?
Okay, I can... that's a good start.
I think it's 1999. She had a pager, but he just got a cell phone.
Right.
That week, essentially. So this is pre, what we understand about how people communicate and everything. This was his third or fourth breakup, essentially, with Hae Min Lee. They had broken up a couple of times before, but this time it kind of was probably going to stick. Yeah. Started dating someone else.
Wait, can we, before we get into that too, just to be even more background stuff, Adnan Syed is a Muslim boy, 17 years old. He was a high school senior, and he had Pakistani heritage, He's still alive. And Hae Min Lee is Korean. I think she was actually born in South Korea, one of the Koreas, and then her family moved there. So just to kind of give, and they were, Baltimore area, just to kind of give who they are as people.
And Adnan and Hae Lee were both in like what essentially would be the gifted program.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
like they had
magnet.
like a lot of the same friends and everything. And she worked at Lens Crafters, and she was dating an older guy at Lens Crafters called Don. And she also was a manager on the wrestling team. And
Yes.
Adnan was on track. Like, I feel like those are all pretty important.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
What else?
So yeah. So the gist is they dated on and off, high school relationship, whatever, and then January 13th, 1999, Hae left school to go pick up her cousin.
Well, we don't know if she went directly there.
Well, that was her intention, I guess. That's what she said she was doing. So she left because she picked her cousin up and dropped them off at home, I guess. But and was just never heard from again.
Right. Yeah.
And it was kind of a big deal because was it 6 months or 8 months earlier, another student from that same high school had gone missing?
It was 8 or 9 months.
Okay.
Yeah, that another, was it a student or another? There are so many people who got. There was another Asian woman who had disappeared like the year before. There was another student. I don't remember if they're the same. If that was the same person or they're just separate instances. But
there were a lot of people dying and being found in a park.
In that park, Leaking Park is known to it's where you go toss your bodies. So.
The joke, like if you're there to bury a body, you're gonna find a body or something.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was.
And Keith says, "I found that by the fourth breakup, I should give up." Yeah, I don't know how many they had in high school there, but they.
And the thing is, too, is that their relationship was secret from their parents.
Right. Because
neither of them
Muslim.
Yeah, we're supposed to really be dating.
Especially. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like, they even had like ways in which they could contact each other to be able to go out when they were dating or to communicate. It's very secretive. But I mean, I was in high school. Most of my friends were secretly dating without their parents' permission.
Right.
Yeah, for Adnan, I mean, he was Muslim, but he it was more cultural stuff. Like he was pretty much an average high school student. And the way the state was trying to present their case against him was saying that like, oh, he committed this crime because it was an insult to him and his culture with her breaking up with him, and how like so then it's not evil to murder her, it's an act of honor to kill her, and which was but when you look and talk to everyone else, like no, he was just a high schooler. It had the teen romance. It wasn't that big of a deal. Like he didn't care so much about his faith being troubled by it. It was just his parents were more conservative in that regard. So you're not allowed to date in the Muslim religion. So you have to marry. So he wasn't allowed to date. Hae could technically date, but her parents would want to meet the family, the whatever boy she was dating. But since they couldn't do that, then she had to keep it a secret as well. But Adnan never thought it was like that big of a deal about the whole secret and the relationship thing in his religion. But according to Hae's diary, it seemed like it was more like she thought it was a bigger deal than he thought it was.
Or she was just being dramatic. Like
well,
that doesn't
high school. Yeah, of course she's dramatic.
Well, I mean, I think sometimes teenage girls play up the drama of things, especially if they're the type to keep a diary. I don't honestly think she thought that it was that big a deal, because otherwise I don't think she would have kept dating.
Like, honestly. Well, I mean, that was also the reasons why they broke up, though, too, is that, I mean, but that could also be part of playing up the drama, because it's just like, oh, life is so hard. And I would say, even if you're not intentionally in high school, like those hormones are terrible. So just trying like everything is the end of the world in high school. Yes. So it really is like I could see it either way, that like maybe she was just trying to build up the drama because she's a high school girl, or maybe it's just because like those hormones are raging and you feel like everything is the end of the world. That like either way,
right.
I think she blew it out of proportion than it probably really needed to be, but it didn't help the defense, because they really cherry picked everything that they could, because it's like things that could have been just innocuous and coincidental, though they're like, well, like this seems really suspicious, and you're like, of course it does when you say it like that.
Well, and I found it kind of funny because they said that Adnan was so serious about his religion and everything, and how this was a betrayal of his religion, and like they used parts of her diary to show that. But then at the same time, they said part of the way that you know he's not a very good person is because he stole from the mosque. And I was like, you can't say both those things. Like that seems kind of incongruous.
They love contradicting themselves.
I know they contradicted themselves in so many ways. And like some of them were just the way in which they described things, not the evidence, which freaking contradicted itself left and right. But I mean, like even like the stories they were trying to tell about the situation, it's like literally that doesn't make any sense. So and I get the like they kept having to like perform all these gymnastics for those kind of logic problems with their stories. It was so frustrating to hear them.
That's too funny. I never even like thought about it that way. I was just like, okay, just because like a teenager steals a couple bucks doesn't make them a murderer, you know. But I didn't think of it that way, that like, yeah, he's such a devout Muslim that he's gonna do like an honor killing, but he'll also steal.
But he doesn't really care that well. And they probably argued that like, well, he was also dating when he shouldn't have, so he was already kind of, maybe he struggled with stealing too, that like he felt so guilty, and then he's just gonna murder everyone now.
Right.
But one of the things that bothered me too is about them saying that he's secretly dating Hae and everything, is that it's like, oh, that speaks to his ability to lie and his need to lead a double life. And I was like, well, if that's true, doesn't that say the same thing about Hae?
Yeah.
Right.
Like honestly, we don't know enough about what Hae was doing that day.
No, because the cops never looked into it. They didn't
do any victimology.
No, they from all of the information through you know the other podcasts and other people looking into it, it was that they had Adnan as a suspect like way early on, and they only like looked into teachers and stuff based around him, and barely even they only looked at talked to Hae's teachers if they also happened to be Adnan's teachers.
Well, which is why they can't even confirm the details of Hae's day.
Right. Yeah.
The idea that she recorded this interview for like, what was it, Athlete of the Week on the day that she went missing. Like, I'm sorry, that would have been like huge, like consequential news when she went missing. They're like, she just recorded this.
Yeah, no one heard of it. No one.
But that's not true. That dating it to the 13th was decided after the fact by everybody when they were trying to arrange all the day shit. That was not true, and it's ridiculous that they did no victimology, because it's like that's what you need to do first. You have no idea about what, if you don't know where she was at any point, then you have no idea who did anything. Like, you have nothing.
Right. So they did have nothing, and yet they were still able to just make up a lot of stuff too, though. Like the cops and the prosecutors, they clearly just they told their own story. They kept changing their narrative all the time. They switched their narrative to fit whatever, or they switched the stories to fit whatever narrative they're trying to tell, which really kind of reminded me of the last couple of years. I don't know why, when just like people are changing what they're talking about, and then like pretending that the other thing never happened though too, and like, no, like this is the right thing now, because so to get a little bit more into what happened, this Hae Min Lee was murdered. She disappeared on the 13th. They found her later on. There was a guy named Jay Wilds who apparently knew what was going on. Like he was able to lead them to the car. He confirmed that Adnan, like he helped conspire, or at least like he was an accessory after the fact, because he helped bury the body. He was tangentially friends with Adnan, that they kind of knew each other. They smoked pot together, and his girlfriend Stephanie was
was part of the group of gifted kids that Adnan and Hae were all friends with. So that's how Jay was connected to them, is essentially he was her boyfriend. So then he knew everyone there. And if they wanted pot, apparently they bought it from him.
Right. Yeah. So, and then Non and Jay, everyone said that they weren't really friends, but they were still somehow like hanging out alone occasionally, though. So I think that they would smoke pot together, but I guess they were not very close. But yeah, so his story, like the cops used him to like get all their get all the information from Jay, and his story changed constantly. He's told so many different stories of like where they have the thing about where the trunk pop happened, and that's where he was shown the body of Hae. And then where they went to, like when they buried the body, when he saw like they said that like Jay was called to pick up Anon at the Best Buy, and that's where he saw the body. Later on, he said that he saw the body in front of his grandma's house, and that's why he didn't say anything because he wanted to protect his grandma. Later on, someone else he told that they were outside a pool hall where he's playing pool, and he goes out and announces it. So it's just like constant, and that's just one thing that his story constantly changed about.
Yeah, and Jay's location when he gets the call changes too.
Yeah.
So when both of those pieces of information change.
So it's just the most frustrating case to hear about, because and somehow they say that like things made sense, and no one questioned how much Jay's story changed. And let's see what Juliet has here.
Okay, I pulled up a picture of them. I'm one of those people that I like to have faces. So that's Hae Min Lee. That's Adnan in 1999 when all of this happened.
A little bit more background on their relationship. They I think it was prom their junior year when Adnan, Muslims also aren't allowed to go to like dances and other things too. So he secretly went to do that, and he wanted to date, and he asked a mutual friend, Debbie, if Hae would be interested, because he didn't want to just ask Hae outright. And so she said like, yeah, like no, like just ask her. And so she said yes, and they started dating and that would have been April, I think it was April something, 1998. And then and so they dated until like this on and off until December of that, until December.
I think the final like nail in the coffin of their relationship was actually the fact that she liked someone else. Like they kept breaking
for sure. Yeah,
but
that was a big one.
But I think like she didn't want to get back together with him after that because she was into Don.
Yeah, she fell in love with Don pretty hard, and he was 22 years old and worked at Lens Crafters, because they kept saying in like the podcast that he was, an older man, and I kept wondering like how old is older though. And eventually, and in the podcast and the documentary they talked about, and the documentary TV one, they say that he's 22 years old, and like in her diary it says that he's blonde, blue-eyed, white, and so she said, this is the type of guy that I would have gone for in my past. And like how she would write like, you're 18, what do you mean in your past? So she was so dramatic, and I loved it. I'm just like, what a high school girl. But
and to be clear, she was 18, so like it wasn't like totally like outside the realm that she would be dating a 22-year-old.
Yeah, people were like really at their age, like, oh, he's a much older guy. And I'm confused by it too, because I was like, 18 to 24 isn't that? It's kind of like, maybe a freshman in college to a senior in college though. So I was just like, I don't see why it's that big of a deal. But I'm like, how could you even, especially maybe at my age now, I'm like, how can you even tell the difference? How do you know that he's that much older at 22 from 18? Like, you all look like 12 to me.
I agree with that at this point. I'm like, I don't see a difference. I don't. But yeah, like I know some people are like, oh, like some people have gotten kind of even more sensitive to age differences these days. That I'm like, no, this one's not. This, first of all, it's legal, and secondly, it was back then, especially, no one cared. Like, it was not as big a deal.
So I wasn't the thing that was suspicious, and it's hard for us to talk about this to people who don't know it at all, because like my brain's going to jump around to all of the different facts. I'm trying to go in order, but then I'm going to jump ahead with different things. So let me backtrack with when Jay was brought in, the cops, what it seems like from the the audio that they recordings that they have is that, you know, a lot of, for all the different people that they interviewed, they didn't start recording until they like had, you know, like the witnesses like knew what they were going to say. And so they've even talked about it later on, like the Hae and Adnan's friends have taught, like in the documentary and whatever other interviews, how they're like, well, I didn't really know, like I wish they recorded at the beginning because I sounded way more unsure. Like by the time we recorded, it was like, oh, we got our story straight, whether it was, you know, true or not. It was just like, oh, it made them sound more confident in their answers, but they were just like, could have been, maybe, I don't know. A big thing too is that like they had to recall something that happened that was just an unimportant day to them, like January 13th. Like no one really knew that it was going to be a big deal until 6 weeks later when they found Hae's body. And so then you're trying to remember, like, what was I doing that day? So everyone, even if they believed they remembered it, like a lot of people had stuff wrong and they just thought like that's why the wrestling match, and like people saying like, oh, a big thing was that Adnan had asked Hae for a ride that day, and then so that's why a lot of people, like the guilters who believe that Adnan, I wonder if people still believe he's guilty. I'm sure they do, but I wonder how many people
I made the mistake of going on
seeing
Reddit.
there are like current ones. Okay, because I've seen ones that are old, but I was just like, why? How can, after all of the information that's come out, I'll say too that Adnan could be guilty. Like there is a chance that is there any evidence to point him in that direction? No, there is none. So if you're someone who believes it, I'm sorry, but you're retarded. If you think that,
well, see,
that there's
the
like
real
any case against him,
whether or not he did it, there is literally nothing
right,
to prove that.
so he should not have been convicted.
No,
right.
I've been mad at the jury. Like, one, I'm terrified of juries because I've said this multiple times too, that I never want to be before a jury of my peers because my peers are idiots. And I just like I'd be so scared, like seeing how many times, like, well, like, yeah, that person said they saw something. Also hate eyewitness testimony. Do you like if that's the only thing you have to base something on, then nope. Hang on, let me add Juliet.
Okay, there we go.
This
is on the Serial Podcast website and the easy timeline, because it's impossible to talk about this with people who have no idea what we're talking about.
The timeline is helpful.
The streaker found her body. That's important. February 9th, a streaker found her body.
Can you read it out loud to me? Because like I have a new setup and my TV does not have good.
1999 is the beginning. January 13th, Hae goes missing after school. February 9th, a guy stopping to take a leak in the city park finds Hae's body in the woods. February 12th, an anonymous caller tells police to look at Adnan as a suspect. February 18th, detectives subpoena Adnan's cell phone records. February 26th, detectives talk to Jen. She says she doesn't know anything. February 27th, Jen goes back to the detectives. She says Jay told her that Adnan killed Hae. February 28th, Jay's first interview with detectives. He tells them Adnan showed him Hae's body. He leads them to Hae's car. Adnan is arrested. March 15th, Jay's second interview with detectives. March 18th, Jay's third interview with detectives. April 13th, Jay's fourth interview with detectives. September 7th, Jay signs an agreement pleading guilty to accessory after the fact of the first-degree murder of
Sorry.
I'm like, wait, what? It's moving. December 8th, Adnan's first trial begins. December 15th, the judge declares a mistrial. Someone got called an asshole. 2000. So now next year. Yeah. And then an asshole. January 10th, Adnan's second trial begins. February 25th, Adnan is convicted of first-degree murder. June, is it 6th?
Yeah.
Adnan is sentenced to life plus 30 years.
And one of the many heartbreaking things in this case is that in his first trial, the jury was leaning towards a not guilty verdict, but the mistrial happened because his we haven't even gotten into his defense attorney,
Gutierrez.
Christina Gutierrez. I guess they were kind of arguing at the bench, like with the judge, and then the judge called her a liar, and then one of the jurors overheard and like said something about it, and so then she called for a mistrial because like that was going to bias the jury of what they thought of her. So then they agreed and they made it a mistrial, but he probably like things were going well at that point, and like she was, as even with the like witnesses and everything though too, like they were leaning towards a not guilty verdict, and then things did not go near, like the prosecutors kind of like bumped up their game in the second trial, and things really spiraled out, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and most of the case that they had built was based on two things corroborating each other: Jay's testimony, and
the cell phone
tower pings, which are useless data. But because cells were relatively new, most people didn't know that. Like I don't know necessarily if the average person knows that cell phones are not a one-to-one, they're not GPS. And back then, of course, a cell phone didn't have GPS on it like ours do now. So all that they could do is they would ping a tower. But if the tower was busy, it would ping another tower. And the cops only got the
incoming
outgoing call phone numbers, and they
incoming.
did not.
Wasn't it? Or was it outgoing or incoming?
No, it's outgoing.
Outgoing. I was outgoing.
Outgoing numbers.
It was outgoing because
that they couldn't.
AT&T would not. If you requested your own data, AT&T, which is whose cell phone provider and service provider was, would not give you your incoming phone numbers if you requested your data. They would give you the outgoing numbers that you called, but wouldn't give you the incoming because they considered it a violation of privacy. Now, most of the time when detectives or prosecutors' offices ask for that data, they get both. But for some reason, this time, only the outgoing information. So it was like if you had requested your data. So only the outgoing calls were given, were even probably requested.
Also, real quick, I just wanted to read Sarah Tars. I want my lawyers to argue that a jury of my peers must prove basic thinking skills to be considered peers. Yes, I concur. I've been terrified of this since 9th grade when was in a play. My aunt was the drama English teacher, and so she directed, and it was one that she wrote. And I was a defense attorney in the play, and the audience got to vote on whether they thought the person was guilty or not. And it was similar to here, regardless of whether the girl actually committed the murder, and there wasn't enough evidence that should have led the audience to convict, but they did. Mm-hmm. They did, and I think my aunt, because they never actually answered it, but my aunt said like, yeah, I think like she was guilty, but I'm just like, this scares me, like because I'm like, there wasn't enough evidence to like beyond reasonable doubt for the jury to be able to vote for that. And so like since I was 14, this has been something I've been very concerned about ever going against. Hi, G-Man.
Hi. Okay, let's see. Let's start. Okay, so on January 13th, today, Hae goes missing. So, let's Adnan offered Jay his car so that
it was Stephanie's birthday, and so
Jay could go get his girlfriend's Stephanie birthday present. Mm-hmm. Right.
And so then his cell phone. Yeah. His cell phone was in the glove box because he couldn't take it to school with him.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So then he asks Hae for a ride after school because Jay will have his car. And at first she says yes. And then later in the day she says she can't because she has something she needs to go do.
Allegedly this happened, because we
Allegedly.
don't even know if people are remembering the right day that this, because
Right.
someone else, I forget which friend it was saying that another friend had asked Hae for a ride and she said she couldn't do it because she had to go do something else. So we don't know for sure if
The
what
thing we
went
know
down.
The thing we know for sure is that Jay had Adnan's car and cell phone.
Yes.
And
that we do know.
Right. And we know that Hae was supposed to pick her cousin up from school
At 3 o'clock.
She didn't show up, and that's
right. And that's what triggered the like missing person.
Because she had done that all the time. Like her little cousin, she would, that was like her job to go pick her up all the time. So, and when that didn't happen, like her family was on high alert immediately.
Right. And so the police call around, talk to some of her friends. Nobody knows where she is or what she could possibly be doing. There's a suggestion that, like, well, maybe she ran off to California to live with her stepdad.
Mm-hmm.
But there's really no evidence to show that she was going to do that. And so
she's also 18, so that made it less like they're like, well, she's
right.
18, she has a car,
Yeah.
she could have left. Like that was, I mean, that is a reasonable assumption, honestly, that she might have left.
Right. So, you know, she goes missing. The police ask around, and then just nobody really knows what on earth happened to her, where she went, until almost a month later, when Mr. S stops at a very like secluded part of a park and says he had to pee in the woods, and while he's peeing he sees an ankle, right? Was it an ankle?
He sees some hair, and then he sees what he thinks is a foot.
Okay, right. And so
he also then later said he was not peeing.
Yeah, right. He kind of changed on whether he started peeing, stopped, never did. He also, so he was a maintenance man at the school, or one of the schools or something. So he was headed, at first he said he was going to lunch, that he was like stopping on his way going home to lunch. And then another story, he was saying that he was going to get a plane, as in like the woodworking kind of plane, to fix some doors at one of the schools that like needed repaired frequently. So then like that, what he was doing changed, and the where he found the body, it's like deep, pretty. He was only like a couple minutes away from his house or something, too, like wherever he was going.
He was like almost equal distance of minutes from his house from his work when he stopped. And she went like more than 120 feet from his car to go pee.
And so it's a little bit more believable in that like the road that he was on was like pretty high traffic. So if you're going in for privacy, like what from some of the podcasters that checked it out, they were like, it makes sense that you want to go back into the woods enough to kind of get away from people being able to see. But where Hae's body was placed made it seem like it's really unlikely that you would just happen upon this.
Well, so right. I mean, the medical examiner that went, and there were police everywhere, and they're like, okay, the body's right here, and he almost stepped on it because it was so hard to see. It just blended in so well,
and he was looking for it,
right?
Like he knew it was there, and he had a hard time seeing it.
Yeah.
That is very
this
funny but true.
Yeah. And Keith, if he claimed he started peeing and then saw a body and stopped peeing, he's probably lying. Yeah.
So Mr. S claims that he stopped when in his initial statements he said like 30 to 40 feet into the woods. It was well over 100, but fine, whatever. He needed his privacy. Asterisk. We'll come back to that. And then he sees his body and he goes back to the school and he tells the school police, and I guess they call it in. And he does have an interview with the cops and he explains the scenario and blah blah blah. And then obviously if you find a body in a very weird place, you become a suspect. So they gave him a polygraph, which the result was deceptive, but the guy administering the polygraph felt like he was very nervous. Mr. S was like really nervous and antsy, so they gave him another one, which he passed.
But the questions changed too.
They just completely changed the questions, right? So, and then back to the asterisk that I put up there about needing privacy. Mr. S is a convicted streaker.
Yeah.
Not just a streaker, but like he ran in front of a cop car and like shook it for her and then took off. This is a special kind of guy. So for him to be so worried about his privacy, tinkling in the woods,
it seems
a couple
unlikely.
Minutes from home, it seems a little odd. Also, I mean, I'm just gonna say this. Because when I was nannying, there were little, because sometimes little kids can't hold it. So what normal people do is they pull over, open the car door, and stand inside of it, so nobody can see what you're doing. There's no real need to go hiking into the woods. But I mean, he did.
And as Winky Winky Woo says, it seems excessive. You could just go behind a tree. Was there a tree? I mean, there were fallen trees. We know there were fallen trees, which suggests that there were unfallen trees to go behind.
Right.
I guess from the people who, when they checked it out in the podcast, they said that like you could still see the road and stuff. So you like going back in, like it was still noticeable. But I think if you can hide it behind a tree enough, like there were still trees there.
Right.
But
he's a guy.
Yeah, right. I mean, my boyfriend being in Chicago before, we were like 2 houses away, and he just like could not hold it in. And like, this is just in the sidewalk here. But yeah, so obviously like the whole like his way of finding, like he didn't find that body then. He already knew about it. I don't know how or like when, like any other information on that, but like it's pretty obvious that he already knew that her body was there. So he had to just like figure out a story. Like I don't know how long he like saved it before talking about it though too, because it's like
right. So I mean that's what he claims and what the detectives just accepted. They stopped worrying about him so much. And so then they've got a body now, which you can assume that hit the local news that her body had been found. And a couple days later, the detectives receive an anonymous call telling them to look into Adnan about Hae's murder.
They had already had him as a suspect prior to that too. So, but they didn't. Yeah, it's a different thing.
And so then a few days after that, they get Adnan's phone records. And that's where this convoluted, twisty trail begins of different people's stories changing all the time. But so technically, so I have that pulled up. On that day, so we know Jay had Adnan's car and the cell phone was in the car. So during that time frame, Jay called Jen at 12:07 and 12:41.
And Jen was a friend. It was a good friend
of Jay's. Right,
Jen,
right. And then
Perry.
At 3:21, he calls Jen again. So the police theory was that she was, well, I guess at this point they might not have a theory of like when exactly the murder happened, but they see that in this time frame where Adnan should have been at school, he's calling this Jen person.
Oh yeah, because they did not know that he didn't have the cell phone at this point. They thought he had it on him.
Right. I mean, yeah, they talked to him the night of, and he just didn't, I don't know where she is.
Yeah, like they didn't. I mean, because these were different detectives and different officers. Because first of all, as it was a missing persons case, so it's not going to the homicide detectives yet. So these are different notes essentially, and different kinds of questions you would ask. And they don't ask him, did you have your cell phone? They didn't even know he had a cell phone at that point.
Right.
Also, a big thing that I've had wondered the whole time, like eventually they think that like she was killed by like she was dead by 2:36 p.m. Because that's when like the come and get me call. We'll get into that too, but that's like when the phone call and like that where it claims that she's dead. They find her body 6 weeks later. I don't know how they like pinpoint to that exact time frame of what like when she would have died because
they didn't. I mean, based
right.
on
Well,
the
it's what I'm saying.
autopsy.
Yeah, that they couldn't have done that. So then, like, I don't even
No.
know how like the cops and the prosecutors were able to like get it. How I mean, corruption, but it's just so silly to think that like, yes, she was dead by this time. That they focused on that point that she would have already. The only reason was just because they were making up all these stories to like fit the narrative.
Well, and also because that was when he was available, their suspect, to have done it.
Right.
Yeah. Where are we at then?
Okay, so we're at here. Okay, so Jen's number is called a bunch of times that morning and afternoon. So the detectives go talk to her, and she's like, "I have nothing. I don't know anything about it." But then the next day, she comes to them and says that Jay told her
with a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't she at her lawyer's house and the detectives came to the lawyer's house in the second conversation?
I thought she came into the police station with a lawyer, but there was a thing where it was like Kevin Urich, the prosecutor's neighbor, who was someone's lawyer. I forget who that was. Like it just happened to be that like, oh, you're also but I don't remember if that was Jen or someone else.
Right. Oh yeah. Okay. So she comes back the next day with a lawyer and says that Jay told her Adnan killed Hae. And so the day after that, the detectives have their first interview with Jay, and he tells them that Adnan killed her, that Adnan showed Jay Hae's body in the trunk, and on that day, did he admit that he helped bury the body in the first interview? I have it.
I don't know I'm not even sure how to keep track of all of Jay's different stories because he's gone from where he didn't help bury the body at all, that he did help bury, that he knew that Adnan was planning on it, that it was kind of he didn't know what was happening that day until afterward, but then they did plan. So I don't know where they all.
Okay,
so he said a couple of times that Adnan told him beforehand that he was going to do it. Like it's
yeah.
Also,
it's we forgot to say too. Hae was killed by strangulation, is what they believe happened. And so I forgot to mention that. I think like manual strangulation, but it might not have been by hands. It could have been by rope or something. They can't really confirm that because of just the markings on her body. So strangulation, though, is not really a crime or it's not really the means of murder for premeditation. I think unless you're like a serial killer, it seems less likely that you would just go in like I'm planning on just using my hands to kill someone. Like maybe if it was with a rope, maybe, but she also had head wounds too.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and then the thing is though is that the autopsy and how other medical examiners have looked at the autopsy report they question strangulation at all. So like as the cause of death.
They thought
so
like maybe drowning. That was another thing
they mentioned drug overdose. Yeah. And I don't know, did they even do a toxicology report for her? Because like I didn't hear anything about it.
Yeah, I don't know about. I mean, I doubt it. I doubt they really did anything.
Because I think a toxicology report would go against the evidence they would have wanted. That's the problem. So many of these things they didn't go down avenues if they thought they weren't helpful to the result they wanted.
Another thing on like just the contradictions that they had, even just generally, they were saying like part of the case was saying that he was this like really brilliant kid, that he could plan something this elaborate, this convoluted, and be able to, but then there are also points where they're just like, he was just a stupid kid. Of course he made these mistakes. And so I'm like, you can't argue. And I've seen this in other cases too, where like they argue the same thing, where like, oh, like you're a genius, like, but you're also an idiot. So like, of course, like you got caught ultimately, but
right.
And it bothers me so much that I'm like, how do people like not see any of these inconsistencies enough to, and that's, I started saying earlier and got off track. I blame the jury at first, and I still kind of do, but I will say that the prosecution just did a good job of lying and making up, like, and letting people believe things that were like more important, like telling the story and everything that, like, yeah, if I were a juror, I might believe the story that they were saying.
Especially if the defense doesn't give you enough reasonable doubt.
I mean, I would still think like what they brought to, even them saying that like the cell phone data is like you can trust it and blah blah blah. I would hope that if I were in that position, like I'd still say this is not enough. Like how do you know for sure that like he was that person who had that phone at that time or something though? Like if there wasn't really, they did lie about like, oh, all the DNA evidence in Hae's car was Adnan's and no one else's, which there were like 20 different prints that that were unaccounted for. They don't know whose they belong to, so they were just different.
There were like 100 DNA samples in the car, and they only kept like what?
Yeah,
like a few. It was ridiculous. And the same thing with the cell phone tower tests. They did a bunch of tests and only kept like 16 because that was handy for them.
So that's what, like, at this point, I kind of feel like unless there's hard like video evidence, and even that too, like you can misunderstand something that happened within videos. I just feel like I don't know. Now I worry about like if I'm a juror, like the prosecution could just be making stuff up to try and like manipulate me, and I don't know, like I just err on the side of like not guilty every time unless there's like, here's this super concrete evidence that like shows that you committed a crime, especially something that's going to put someone away for life,
which is how it's supposed to work. I mean, beyond a shadow of a doubt doesn't mean they probably did it. It means they definitely did it. There's no other explanation for this, this evidence. But
that's why we were chatting a lot in the Discord too, and Alex scolded us because Juliet and I were just like talking too much about it, watching through the podcast. But
I'm just like silent.
But one thing is that I think it was after I started listening to Serial and everything and learned about this, was that I changed my mind about the death penalty. That I used to believe in it, but now I'm like, ideally, like I would be okay. Like if someone murders someone, I'm okay with the idea of a fair punishment of being like, your life gets taken. But I don't like now, like, unless you know for sure, and it's not just like something that you can be convinced of though, but there's like, here's this hard like, and I pretty much, I think like people that like there is video of it though, that I don't even know if I want to say like the people witnessed it, because I'm still worried about eyewitness testimony too. So it's just like I think that in reality I could never be okay with death penalty, because it's just kind of like, I don't know, like the only thing that maybe is that like, yeah, if it's happening in the crime, that like self-defense, then like, well, it's too late anyway. But when it comes to like a trial, I just don't think I would ever be okay with a death penalty again.
I think there needs to be a preponderance of evidence, and there's definitely not one like here. Like I mean, and by that I mean like not this shaky junk science evidence for no, hell no. And if you have problems with your crime lab,
which they did,
and they did. I feel like when it came to Baltimore, with this case and with many other cases, there was so much fuck up and corruption in so many different ways that you can't trust anything that they did. That like, if someone fails once, that's supposed to be enough to throw a case out. Honestly, like if like, oh, we threw out this evidence because it got messed up, so we had to throw it out. That's the whole point. It has to be perfect. That's how the court system is supposed to work, is that if this piece of evidence is not perfect, we throw it out. If this you know, like, because you guys screwed up somehow, you screwed up the chain of evidence or whatever. This interview, you didn't do something right. We threw it out because you didn't, you know, we can't even use that. Or like that's how it's supposed to work. Like, essentially, it's supposed to be incredibly freaking hard to get anything to be admissible.
Which
and
sucks.
the problem,
For
yeah.
I mean, like, for the cops, like, I get it that it's like, oh, especially for someone who is guilty, though, like, oh, this evidence was tainted, so now we can't use it. Like, yeah, that sucks, but I'd rather the saying of just, you know, I'd rather let 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man be imprisoned or whatever. But and it's more likely too anyway. Like, if you let those guilty people free, you probably are going to get them later on when they continue to commit other crimes too. But like, which sucks. But like, I don't want someone being in prison for 23 years who shouldn't be.
Right.
Or death penalty, because like, yeah, that was one of the cases too that Undisclosed podcast was talked about, where I don't even know what happened to that guy in the end. Like, he got a stay of execution for a couple of weeks, as they did, but people believe that he was wrongfully convicted and then he was put on death penalty. And so I don't remember his name or what happened to him, but he was potentially was murdered by the state if he didn't actually do the crime.
Speaking of the death penalty, we're on the day that Adnan got arrested still. When they arrested him, he was 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The charging documents, they changed his birthday by a year to make him 18, which made the case capital.
You're right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at his bail hearing, the judge said, well, it's a capital case, so I'm not going to grant bail. And because you could flee the country. So the problem here is that they literally changed his birthday on the charging documents, and it affected the judge's decision. And honestly, that alone should have gotten the case thrown out. As soon as you realize that, oh, wait a minute, when we decided whether or not he got bail, we had the wrong birthday, and that completely changed the case. Like, that should have been a mistrial right there. That's huge. And and like, it shouldn't have been a capital case from the beginning. He was 17.
And the fact that, like you were saying, Alex, that you know, the way the court system should be, like how things should be, and the fact that they are not like this, that we do convict innocent people, that the juries are stupid and everything, that's why I don't like this happen, even if it doesn't happen, like, oh, it only people who don't believe it happens that much, though. Like, even if it happens one time out of a million, like, something is wrong. Like, this is a flawed system, and we need to address it and fix it, though. Like, I just don't understand the lack of caring by those people.
Well, I think a big part of the problem is that judges are not actually following the rules when, like, first of all, every circuit has its own laws and rules to follow for procedure. But like, especially it seems like in Baltimore, they have rules and they're not following them. Like, here's the thing, like, if a judge and like, I guess it's part of the problem is that if the defense attorney doesn't argue enough that, look at how wrong this was, they screwed up this evidence, you got to throw it out. So if the defense attorney fails at that point to point out that there was a failure with the system, then the evidence goes forward, or the bad chain continues into the case. And that's a huge problem. I don't think that should be the case. I think if a judge sees that, oh, look at that, I see this chain of evidence was messed up, I'm throwing out this evidence, without the defense attorney bringing it up necessarily. I don't think this is something that should be dependent on someone making a good argument, whether or not the chain of evidence is screwed up.
Right.
Yeah. I don't. That's why one of my big problems with the system too is that, like, I don't think prosecutors and defense should be like against each other. I think they should both be trying to find the truth, and I still think that that guilty people, they deserve a chance, and because you're innocent until proven guilty, and you don't want to be unfairly punished by something. So like the defense attorneys for that. But I don't think that a defense attorney should necessarily be trying to like say like you don't get any punishment at all, like if you are guilty. Like I think that's kind of iffy. But my bigger problem is prosecutors, where they don't care, that they will try, like their goal a lot of times is to win cases, because then that's how you get promoted, that's how you go up in the ladder. And I don't think that's the right way. Like winning a case shouldn't just mean putting the other person in prison. It should be that we found the truth, and just because that the defense won, that doesn't mean you lose. Like I hate that that's the way that they see it in most cases.
Another problem with that is that prosecutors, because they focus on wins, they won't they'll go, I'm not going to take this one to court, even though the victims want it to go forward. And it's like, because I don't think I'm going to win. Yeah. And it's like, that's not good either. That either way, this whole deciding things based on wins, it's sort of like surgeons deciding whether or not they're going to perform surgery based on whether or not they think it'll be successful for them, for their, like they're like, oh, it's a risky surgery, I'm just not going to do it because I don't want my numbers to get
right. Yeah.
And that's essentially what these prosecutors are doing, is they're going, well, this rape case is going to be hard because all I have really is the victim's word, so I'm not going to go forward with this.
Right.
But then like and it's like, even though the victim wants them to, and or like, oh, I think I can win this one, whether or not the guy is actually, guilty of committing a crime, but I think I can get this one, so I'm going to go forward with it. I don't think either of those is a good way of doing it. Like it's bad to do it based on whether or not you think you can win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I fully dislike the system. Also, G-Man says, I've never met an Adnan I trusted. So fair point. He was probably guilty just based on that. Okay, so where are we at in the case that we're still on?
Okay, Adnan's arrested. Okay, so then over the next...
hi, Dan Howard. Welcome.
Hello. A few days, they interviewed Jay 2 more times. Now, we'll get into it deeper, but okay. Learning how technology works. I'm going to share a different...
yeah, StreamYard's annoying because they used to be able to do tabs and just switch from tab to tab, and now it makes you cancel out and then reshare. I don't know why that changed.
Okay.
Ooh.
Okay. So let's just, I'm just going to scroll past so people watching can get this, an idea. So this is Jay's first interview here in the middle. And that's all the detail he had for them. And this is, his this is what happened interview, right? Then a couple days later, all of a sudden he has more information. Certain things have definitely changed. Let's see.
And coincidentally, they matched up when they changed when the police got new information.
Right. Yeah. So at 4:30, Jay either dropped Adnan off at track practice, or they were at Patapsco State Park smoking a blunt. One or the other. Timelines don't matter at all. And then by the time that Jay testified in the second trial, because the first one was actually really short, if you the mistrial, this is where the first interview ends, and this is how much information he managed to come up with much later. And all the things that he alters in his story are to fit the call log, pretty much, so that the phone calls in and out make sense for the timeline. So I was thinking about this earlier, what can we say we know for relative fact happened that day?
Both Hae and Adnan were in school that day. And Hae left at around 2:15-ish to go do something, whether it was going straight to try and pick up her cousin, but she was supposed to pick her up at 3. So I think, or no, we don't even know for fact that like there it's just allegedly that someone asked Hae for a ride that day, but we don't know for sure if there were 2 different people. One was Adnan allegedly, and then one was another friend, but we don't know whether or not either of those happened on that day. So they were both in school. Hae left at the end of school, and I think we did confirm that Adnan did go during his lunch period to go pick up Jay, and they went to look for a gift for Stephanie, right? I think that.
Well, no, they well, according to Adnan's like timeline and what we know about his schedule, it's likely that Adnan picked Jay up, and then Jay dropped him at the school. Because
but he still went during lunchtime. Just as far
he went
as
at lunch. I don't think he went with him shopping. Right.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I don't remember what Non has said about that. Like, because Jay had changed, like they were at the mall for like an hour and a half or something, but I don't know if that was confirmed.
Well, we're relatively sure that Adnan was in psychology that day, his psychology class, and that was at 12:50.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, I guess he did have a free period. Adnan says that he was back at school, like half an hour or so after he left to pick Jay up. But so we know at some point Adnan and Jay, they were in the car together.
And Jay kept Adnan's car, and then his phone was there. Like, I think that, and then so those things are pretty much the only confirmed things that happen. Everything else has just been speculation and human memory.
Let's see, did Jay stick with went to Kathy's house? Yes. Okay, so across all of Jay's narrative, actually they all agree on this. Adnan and Jay both say that after track practice, they went to Jay's friend Kathy's house to smoke.
Can you post this link in the chat?
Yes.
Or public or private, but that way I can open it up.
I don't know.
See if I could just read it in my computer.
I don't.
Too blurry for you.
Yeah. Okay. This is helpful. Thanks.
Okay, so what we know is the police were already looking at Adnan. Not crazy. I'm sure in their initial line of questioning, they asked her family and friends, and somebody mentioned that she had an ex-boyfriend, or said like you should ask Adnan because whatever reason. So they were looking into him. We know that now, that they looked into him before they spoke to Jay. But they arrested Adnan based on Jay's first interview, where he says that did he say that Adnan, Jay drops Adnan off? Okay, so he says in the first interview that basically he took Adnan's car, and then at some point Adnan called him and said to come pick him up. And when he went to pick Adnan up, Hae's body was in the trunk.
And that was at Edmondson Avenue in the first interview.
And that's a big thing too, just as far as Hae's body being in the trunk. And I mean, this is jumping ahead too, but
I think it's a good place to put it, because we didn't have this information learning about the case, but now
Yeah, Hae's body could not have been, though. I mean, like, because it was a Nissan Sentra, right, or something, and like and people noted how small the trunk is, and didn't even know if her body could fit in there.
Right.
So, like, even if it could, she would have to be like bent up in there somehow, contorted enough that like to fit in. But her body, the lividity, which is when the blood is, goes to the lowest part of the body wherever it's placed,
settles,
was all
the gravity.
right, and it was a full frontal lividity,
which means she was laying prone for a while,
face down. So and it was like pretty even too, so it wasn't that like she was, I don't think she could have been like crumpled up face down. Like I think she was more spread out, but I don't know if that part's for sure. But for sure, it's that like it was down on her on her front side. She was face down.
When they found her body, she was on her side, which means that she was somewhere else, prone for a while.
Yeah,
before her body was buried.
And so the state claims that because Jay's story was around like 7 p.m., which he later, after every like I think it was 2014 when he had like another interview, that he changed it because they said it was around 7 p.m. when they buried the body, but when the podcast and stuff have gone back and talked to different what are they called? People who
medical examiners?
like whoever does autopsies, medical examiners.
Yeah.
They were saying that a body with that lividity and everything could not be buried that soon after. It had to be like at least 8 to 12 hours. And so from like 2:30 to 7 p.m., it wouldn't have been enough time for that. So then Jay had to change his story, I think, after the podcast came out, and said that like, no, it actually happened around midnight. But I mean, so it doesn't matter. No one seemed to care that he lied about anything.
Right. Trying to see if I could. There was a picture of the trunk of her car, just because, like, you know, like in certain cars, maybe you could lay somebody sort of down on their front, but like not in this one.
I don't even know how old it was. If it was in 1990, I would doubt it was. I don't know how old hers.
There's a actual picture of the trunk of her car. Why isn't it here?
It's profitable. Let me see. My picture is loading slowly. Oh, that's on a trunk. Oh, I think that was the thing showing the ignition lock or whatever it was called. So I don't know the size of it, but I just like other people who were talking about like who knew her and like that they just were like, that seems pretty small, or others who have seen the pictures. So just from their opinions. Right. Yeah. So what else happened during? So Jay's story consistently changed. Can we talk about the cell phone pings too? Just because I want to get that out of the way. Oh, go ahead.
I do want to say though about Jay's first interview is that he signed his release to have the interview, and then several hours later the recording starts.
And then they had it. And okay. So just on his interviews, one thing that they found out through the Undisclosed podcast by Susan Simpson is that during the recordings, he look through the transcript, the written transcripts, you might not notice it, but then like in the audio recordings, you could hear how when they ask him a question and he would be like, and not remembering the thing. And then you hear the tap, tap. Yeah. That as if, and then he'd be like, oh, sorry. Yeah. And then he mumbled things about like, oh, I didn't see this up here. Like, oh, I missed this part. Oh, I missed, like he would say these things, which clearly seem to indicate that there's documents that he's looking at and then he's trying to read off of to give his statement. And then he couldn't, and he was just a bad actor because he kept forgetting his lines. And you can hear the frustration in the cops' voice. That they like, one of my favorite things is when he's talking about the bear, like he had Adnan's car and then Hae's car, and then they have to explain away how they go like get rid of the body and everything. And Jay keeps forgetting that there are 2 cars because he gave Adnan a ride.
Having a conversation. Even though they're in 2 different cars.
And then the detective says that like, well, there are 2 cars. Like, oh yeah, sorry. So like he's driving Hae's car and I'm driving his, and we're talking about like something, I don't even remember what the discussion was, like something about marijuana or whatever though too. And like, there are 2 cars. How can you be having this conversation when you're in a separate car? Only one of you has a cell phone.
Right, and so he was clearly a very reliable witness from the very beginning of this.
And people, I just don't get, like, especially like the viewers and like the guilters that are out there on Reddit who are saying like, oh, but Jay said that, like, how can you trust anything? Like, well, he lied about this thing, but he's obviously telling the truth. He was only lying to protect so and so, but this part's true. Like, how do you know? And then you'll believe that. You believe him, but then you're saying Adnan is a liar, Asia is a liar, everyone else that like says anything that's helpful to Adnan is a liar. They're like, why do you think one person who has admitted to lying, that everyone knows is lying, is now telling the truth, but everyone else is lying instead? That like, I don't understand the mental gymnastics that you have to.
There's other mental gymnastics too, because I've heard people say that, well, Adnan's story has changed. Well, it has not changed as much as Jay's, for one thing. And it's like, if that's a reason to throw out anything Adnan says, it's certainly a reason to throw out anything Jay says.
Yeah, like, but
the real problem here
is backup stuff.
Yeah, the real problem that I see with how people are responding to this is that, including people involved in it, like Asia, actually, is that it's like, well, the state convicted them. The state doesn't get things wrong, right? So obviously he did it. Is essentially the like baseline behind all of those gymnastics is going on, is this assumption that the state has to have gotten it right.
Which, again, in the last couple of years, people have had the same thing of like, well, why should we have gone through all of these lockdowns and things if we didn't need to? Like, I trust that the state, the government and everything knows everything. So like this was for the best.
Which is, that was the thing. Like, Asia said after the fact that she was like, well, I assume that he did it because they convicted him.
Yeah. Which I'm like, kind of surprised. For some people in Baltimore, though, like that if you just I would think that like living in the city or near it too, that everyone's kind of like, yeah, we know about corruption here. And that even as kids, I would just kind of assume that they would think that.
The Wire is based on the corruption in the Baltimore police, including some of the detectives involved in this case.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of the detectives involved with this case have gotten in trouble for coaching witnesses and threatening them and giving them gifts, essentially, to massage their witness testimony. So it's like, so we literally cannot accept any of these witnesses when they talk to these detectives, because we already know from the seed of other cases involving these detectives that they have been wrong and that they have done unethical and underhanded things to get the results they wanted. So we cannot trust any of this. Like, so any of Jay, first of all, because of Jay's statements changing so much, that's enough not to trust it. But the detectives involved in talking to him and what has happened with them recently shows us that we can't trust it as well. So there's more evidence on the side of don't trust any of this evidence than there is evidence to suggest that it's sound.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Well, and okay, so they are questioning Adnan like 6 weeks later, right?
Yeah. Or, I mean, from the murder, or
right, from the day that she went missing. So the day in question, by the time he's being interrogated, like, it's been so long. Like, I mean, I can't remember for sure what I did last Tuesday, and they're asking him to remember everything he
things
did.
this morning. Like, I don't.
Right. Weeks
How about
ago.
this? I never leave my home. I can't tell you what I did 6 days ago.
Yeah,
Right.
especially when
I
things.
literally never leave my home, and I couldn't tell you what my day was like.
But
Like,
and it's harder
that's
though
not
too
happening.
when nothing really stands out. Then like the days are gonna blend together. Like I haven't gone anywhere in the last few days. So like, oh, did this thing happen this morning or was that yesterday? Like I don't know, something about my geese. But I just
I remember to take my morning, pills. I don't know, like, because I might be remembering 5 days ago. Like when days bleed together, the longer the distance between when you're trying to remember them and when they happen.
And the older you get, now the years just blend
Yes,
together.
that's true.
It's
Yes.
crazy.
So Adnan not being able to account for every second and offer evidence of everywhere he was 6 shut up. It's like 6 weeks earlier. It's kind of understandable. That day didn't become a big deal to him for any reason other than it was Stephanie's birthday. And later in the evening, he got a phone call from the police asking if he knew anything about where Hae was. Other than that, it was a Wednesday, whatever. Now for Jay to claim all of this crazy stuff happened that afternoon, and he saw a body, and then he helped bury a body, and like all this stuff. For his story to constantly shift and add details, drop details that are no longer convenient, like that kind of thing, that is clearly he's lying. He did in a recent interview say he was lying to like protect friends and he didn't want to get people involved, so he was trying to be evasive and shift his story so he wouldn't have to include people. But one of the people that's involved in this is Jen, and the cops talked to her before his first official interview, so that he has no reason to protect her. And she says that he told her to tell the police. So the day of his initial interview, he worked overnight in a like porn video store, and he called one of his coworkers to come hang out at the store with him because he was so freaked out. Somebody was out to get him. And he told his coworker remembers him saying that the cops were going to come talk to him about something. And he was antsy and wondering why they weren't there yet. And kind of, he was like worried about this van that was parked in the parking lot and all this stuff.
They're going to come and get him or something.
Right. Somebody's coming.
Which we still are unclear of what he ever meant by that, like who he was concerned about.
Absolutely. But the way, so when, in Serial, when they talk to that coworker, he keeps saying, Jay was scared of Adnan. She's trying to get him to think about it a little harder and be like, are you sure he said that? Or are you putting pieces together like, oh, he was scared that night. It must have been Adnan he was scared of. So it's been so long. It's hard to be sure that guy is remembering that part correctly. But the fact that he remembers Jay being really freaked out, worrying about this van, saying people were out to get him, being eager for the cops to come pick him up when he's like a petty drug dealer at this point. That I believe that happened because that coworker really has no reason to fabricate any of that. So Jay was freaked out by something. And then
allegedly,
right.
Unless he was just thinking I need to because he was also known to tell stories and like make up stuff. Like that's another thing too, that like his friends still believe him about these things, but they also say like, yeah, he just made up stories. He's kind of pathological sometimes. So I also don't know whether he would have just kind of he knew that this whole thing was going on, so he needed to like pretend some other things. I don't know.
Right. So there's something's up there with the timing of everything. Because also, I believe his interview was like late at night, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
His first
and
interview?
I don't trust that is his actual first
Oh,
interview.
no.
Right. Yeah.
Not at all.
No, they've dug up evidence that he clearly was talking to the police prior to any of that.
Yeah.
Also, just as an aside about when we were talking about like the dates and like remembering 6 weeks ago, I was trying to look up to see what was 6 weeks ago. It was August 14th, and I was trying to think back what happened that day, and then I realized I don't remember anything that happened that month. I
Right.
just thinking all of August. What did I do?
Right.
So I would have been convicted for sure.
Yeah. So one of the things I thought was really interesting, just like my own observation, is on the podcast, Serial, Sarah asks Adnan, but like, okay, so you don't remember anything because it was an unremarkable day. But the cops called asking if you knew where your ex-girlfriend was. Like, that doesn't trigger any memories. And he's like, I mean, I remember that happening.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I remember, the
Everything else.
afternoon. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas Dawn, Hae's boyfriend
Current
at the
boyfriend,
time,
yeah.
right, that we should get into him too. He said when the cops called asking about Hae, he immediately thought through every single thing he did that day.
Yeah, and thought that, oh, I'm going to be a suspect.
It's going to be me and Adnan, which is, to me, that was a weird thing to say. I mean, I get, that they always look at the partner or the ex-partner.
And he's retelling this as it's a hindsight thing. Like maybe he
Right.
didn't actually think that right at the time. Maybe that's just him recalling that, like, I don't know. So like giving him the benefit of the doubt, like maybe even himself, like he misremembers that, like that's his immediate thought, but maybe it wasn't. But like to say that it was is disconcerting.
It is.
Well, it could be that he's saying that to make himself sound smarter than he is. Oh, that could be his.
Oh, right. Oh, he doesn't remember. I remember everything. Yeah. But interestingly, so the police call her boyfriend at the time and say, hey, have you heard from her? Like, she didn't show up to pick up her cousin. Nobody's heard from her. He's like, nope. Immediately starts running through like, oh, what did I do today? Doesn't call her. Like if the police called and said your girlfriend was missing, wouldn't you at least try paging her? I understand not calling. She didn't have a cell phone. She had a pager and then her house phone. Her parents were weird. So her friends, like, for guys, like they would page her and then they had this way of calling worked out to where her home phone wouldn't ring, but she could pick it up. Like so the state said it was odd that Adnan never paged her again after the day she went missing.
He was the ex-boyfriend, and like, yeah, they were friends, but like the current boyfriend,
that's a little weird. Wouldn't you just, because like at this point she just didn't show up. It's still the same day.
They had a date plan for the next day, right?
Right. So it's kind of like, why wouldn't you, like, okay, you're not answering your parents' calls, understandable, whatever, but like maybe you'll answer for me. I just can't imagine a scenario in which you're just like, oh, that's crazy, nobody knows where she is. Well, let me know when you find out.
and everyone had tried to say too that like, well, maybe it was just because all the friends, they all didn't really think anything was going on, because at that time there were snow days from school and then religious, because it was Ramadan. And so like there were a lot of kids that were missing school anyway, and for a bit. So they're all the friends kind of didn't think much of it, because they all thought like, oh, she's just with her boyfriend. And I can kind of understand that, like, yeah, maybe you're not especially without cell phones back then, like, or that were common too, if Adnan was like one of the only people with it at the time.
Right.
You just kind of like, yeah, you don't talk to them for a while. But But for Dawn, just because he did have a date planned with her, and then to apparently never attempt to contact her. However, we also don't know for sure. Like, he says that he never did. I guess we're just taking his word that he said he didn't contact her. We don't know whether he did try paging her or not.
And why don't we know?
We don't have her pager. And they never subpoenaed that information.
Yeah, they didn't do anything. So and
oh my gosh, I'm like, and it's gone now. It was 1999. Like, nobody has that record.
In his defense, though, because no one ever looked it up or anything, like, he could lie about this, and he's saying that he didn't contact her. So, like, he could say, like, I did try, and to, like, make himself look better. So unless he's just dumb and, like, doesn't think about that, like, to lie, but then that's probably just, I don't know, like, it seems like that might be honest.
It kind of fits into the, like, I guess, like, one of the cops that talked to him, or somebody, I think it was one of the cops that said he didn't seem all that concerned, and he didn't seem to be all that into her.
The cop did, and then I think there are other people, I don't remember if
that's also interesting, because, again, he's 22, she's 18.
She pursued him too. Like, he was dating someone else when she kept saying, like, hey, when are we gonna go out? And so it did start off that way.
And she was, like, very I don't know, like, the way she writes about guys when she's into them is very high school girl, just like, so, we'll never know at this point, but is it possible that relationship was really one-sided?
Oh, for sure.
Like, he was kind of like, yeah, whatever, I'll date this cute 18-year-old I work with, but, like, not serious about it at all. And she's, like, head over heels.
Head over heels is what she thinks she is, essentially. But yeah,
right.
I know she's highly enthusiastic, and he's not necessarily as into it.
Yeah. So then the suspicious things about him, though, are that no one really looked into it, because he had his alibi. It was that he was working at a different store at the time of it. But
never confirmed that.
But the way that they kind of did was that they didn't until later on, when there wasn't a time card for him. And then what was it that when anyone else was trying to get it, in the defense or someone, though, but then the prosecution was able to get, like, a week later, that they said that the time card didn't exist. And then a week later, they were like, oh, actually, here it is. It does exist. But then was it the ID, the employee ID, was different than the one at his main store. And his mom or stepmom was the manager of that other store that he worked at. This was Lens Crafters. So, like, those things were suspicious. I don't remember.
The other thing that's weird is they called his store, and I guess his mother was like, yeah, he worked from this time to this time at this other location. But they've spoken to people that worked at Lens Crafter at that time, like employees, other managers, everybody. And they all say there's no way you couldn't access the time, like, records in a different store. So how did she know, like, exactly what times he was supposedly at that other store?
So that whole thing was suspicious on its own. The other thing that I find suspicious, and I didn't even know until watching the documentary, was that so they have another friend, Debbie, who is close, and she was suspicious of Dawn. And I've heard in the podcast where she had a 7-hour long conversation with Dawn because she thought he was suspicious. And, like, so they think that started over email, and then he was, like, willing to, like, chat about it and stuff too. So eventually they connected over a phone. So they had a 7-hour conversation, and I thought that is weird to have, like,
so weird
that, like, you don't have, that's like 7 hours becomes pretty intimate, though. Like, just like whatever you're talking about, like, to continue talking for that long, like, it becomes more personal.
I think 3 hours is when of a one-on-one conversation is when things start getting, like, super personal.
Yeah, and, like, you're done because they said like, oh, she was trying to confirm that like, you know, she had suspicions about him, and he was able to put those to bed, so she didn't find him suspicious anymore within that time. And then in the documentary, she talks about how like she mentioned that she was going to visit her sister at like a college or something though too, and he said like, hey, let's meet up and like, let me visit you, and that his intentions were romantic. He was romantically interested in her, and she wasn't clear at what point this happened though, because I was like, did they continue talking for a while? Like how long had it been that she hadn't, that at least 6 weeks, I think, by the time, because I think by the time that they had that phone call, it was after Hae's body was found. That's when she was trying to like find out about it, right? So like I guess he could have moved on from Hae then, especially, but then he talks, that's where he like might be lying, because he talks about how like, oh, I still love her to this day, like a more recent interview about it, like, you know, there's a part of me that still loves her. I'm like, you dated her for like 2-3 weeks and you didn't seem to care when she disappeared, and now you were apparently interested in this other girl 6 weeks later, after your girlfriend was murdered, and you're like interested in her friend now. Like this seems a little,
I would say, however, that I could see someone romanticizing someone they knew briefly after they're dead. I could see them romanticizing their relationship.
That's what Debbie had said too, is like, was he trying to just like find the same thing that he had with Hae with her? Was that so? If he was actually that into her, like I can also just see from like, he's kind of a creepy guy, that maybe he's just like, yeah, let me just date another girl here because like she's showing interest in me. I think I'm just basing it on like his photos. It seemed like he was it might have been kind of socially awkward. He was in high school, like his high school photo was not that flattering, and then he I think like in the photos of him in Lens Crafters, he was good looking enough. And then in the recent one, in the documentary, he I guess at 23 he lost his, he got what was it? He was some sort of disabled, so he wasn't able to work anymore. So he hadn't been able to work since he was 23, and he did not look that great. He was standing and stuff, but he was a large man and I think kind of baldish or something. I don't remember where I was going with that, but he, I think, oh, just because I'm like, is he just eager? Like anyone who's showing interest in him, will he take them up on that offer or something?
Right. I mean, and like back then, I mean, the internet existed, but it was mostly for like email and chat rooms. And so like, I kind of get the like, oh, this other girl that's kind of cute, like we talked, so maybe I can hit her up. You know, I guess back then that was like really normal way to meet people. It's just
through my girlfriend.
You know what I mean? Like, you're not through like,
no, like through exes. Like, no, I mean, no, that's actually kind of true. Like, everyone you dated was from not
a friend of a friend,
girlfriend, but it was a friend of a friend. That was like a common thing. Like like, oh, it's like, oh, your sister's friends or your brother's friends or your ex's friends. Like, it's just, I mean, we weren't meeting. I mean, honestly, I do think it's a better way to meet people than apps and online.
Yes. So I think everyone who's like heard the details of this case, we all kind of are like, you didn't do a lot of work to rule Dawn out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, he said he was at work, somebody else said he was at work, and you're just like, okay, we're done with him.
Yeah, no, they did a terrible job of that because they had already thought they already had Adnan as the suspect. Like prior to that anonymous call and stuff like that, they I forget where it was that I had heard it though, but like they established that Adnan was their suspect like very early on, and that was all they cared about. Like it didn't matter like anything else. They had very much tunnel vision.
Right. So, like, assuming...
Sorry, people in chat keep talking about me being murdered.
Oh my god. Also, me and Alex will start a podcast and solve your murder.
Yeah. I hope you would. Ooh. Exciting. Um,
Okay, so assuming. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so assuming, because we don't know this for sure, but we'll assume that Adnan really did ask Hae for a ride because he knew that he was giving Jay his car. And then she said yes. And then later in the day, she said, never mind, I can't. I have something to do. So, like, if that part, and that's based mostly on other, like, their classmates.
Overhearing.
Right. That's what they remember of that day. So if that's true, in the morning, Hae could give Adnan a ride, no problem. And then something happened partway through the day that made her say, never mind, I can't. I'm not going to have time. I've got to hurry.
Yeah, and I really want to know what that could have been. I want to know how long it takes for her to get to her cousin's school, though, because they get out around 2:15, and then it takes some time for the buses to leave. Like, so it was a whole thing of like, can you get to Best Buy when they were trying to do that by 2:36 and murder someone? And also, they had a thing like the state's case was saying that Hae was strangled within like 10 seconds, and even I knew that like before listening to the podcast. Like that's so like on TV, I obviously they need to make it shorter for the sake of keeping interest and stuff, but you cannot strangle. If anyone's trying to murder me later, since you keep talking about me being murdered, if you're trying to strangle me, you can't do it in 10 seconds. Unless if I'm still conscious, like it's going to take a few minutes for a person to die. Because like even when you're unconscious, you have to continue because your brain is going to like you'll start breathing again. Your brain's going to come back.
That happened to one of the BTK's victims. He was doing manual strangulation of his victim, and he stopped because he passed out, thinking he died. The guy came to later, ran outside, and he was, by the way, naked, and asked for help. And the BTK killer convinced people that he was his boyfriend and that he was high and that he was going to take him home. And then he killed him. But
oh my God, really?
Yeah, I know. That's one of the most tragic stories from.
Wow, I mean that's a thing that's happened in like Criminal Minds too, where like the an episode where like the victim escapes for a minute, but then I think they have had that too, where like the murderer is just like, no, actually, like I'm just gonna take her home, and they
I mean I mean it's because it actually happened.
No, so
and
terrifying.
And the BTK killer like didn't realize that he had to keep strangling him, because that's the thing, is that like a lot of people don't, because of Hollywood, because of how they show it. A lot of people don't realize you have to keep holding on to fully kill the person. It's
hard murdering people.
It's not easy.
It's not as quick and pretty as they make it look like on TV, right? So this map. Okay, so this is the high school, cell tower, right? Okay, that's Best Buy. But so let's say Hae was leaving high school. She was gonna drive to. This is where her cousin is supposed to be picked up.
That's actually that's a lot further away than I would have thought.
Right. I just know from experience.
So okay, so then let's go back to so the Best Buy theory. Somehow Adnan convinces Hae to take him to Best Buy where he kills her. Then he and Jay ditch the car over here. And then Jay drops him back off at school in time for track practice.
That's the first interview's
timeline. Right. So then the second interview, where is that? Oh, where's the funny place? His car.
Just remembering the car trips, like afterward too, they had to avoid how there's no dirt and like shovels in one of the car trunks. They had to do like we drove one car and then like dropped shovel and then came back and then drove again. They had to do like 3 trips to make the story make sense. And the whole thing is so convoluted.
Yeah, it is.
Was it the second one where they go to the state park to smoke?
Yes.
And the sun is setting or something.
And he saw the body somewhere else in that one.
I don't know
Well, the
which one's
first one, he
which.
didn't see it at Best Buy. He saw it at Edmondson Avenue.
Oh, okay.
Where's that? Where's the
This-
avenue? Because I just know Best Buy, Grandma's house, and Pool Hall. And not all of them are from Jay's like statements on there. Like it's from other friends too who he had told as well. So it was like a friend saying, "This is what Jay told me." So I don't know. Like his story just changed nonstop.
Yeah. So okay,
at
so
one
when I
point
was
wasn't he at a McDonald's? Like I think he was at McDonald's when.
Oh yeah, in the initial interview, they were at McDonald's when the cops called them because they were gonna go looking for Hae. These
and then
two guys that aren't friends.
Right.
Yeah, they're not friends though. They're barely acquaintances. What? So the thing I found interesting here is like this is Woodlawn High School. This is where Hae was buried. And then this is where Hae's car was found weeks later, that's another fun thing to get into. But like she was buried relatively close to the school. And
yeah, it was only like 3 miles away or something.
Right. Where is come on. There was another pin.
Oh yeah, that's the Edmondson Avenue one.
Oh, okay.
The intersection where Adnan. That's from the first.
Okay. Interview. So they don't have it on because Serial didn't talk about this. Okay, so in the call logs on that day, while we know Jay had the car, he calls someone named Patrick. And apparently Jay used to buy weed from Patrick. And it's not on this map because Serial didn't get into that at all. But Patrick is somebody Jay knew specifically. And Patrick's house is definitely over in this vicinity on this side of the park, which I thought was interesting because he called. Nope. Yep. Okay. So he called Patrick at 3:59 p.m. that day. But one of the people on Undisclosed has dug up that on several Wednesdays prior to that and after that Wednesday, Adnan's cell phone was pinging the towers through Lincoln Park and calling Patrick at that same time of day. So this probably wasn't the only time that Jay took Adnan's car. And it seems to have been that he was going to his weed dealer on those days. Which is an interesting little tidbit that, it's just like, it's funny because they both claim, Jay is claiming he's not even friends with Adnan. But he borrows his car and goes and picks up drugs in it and helps him look for his missing
I'm not loaning something like a car to someone I'm not friends with.
Right, yeah. That like I mean, I guess they've said that like that was kind of a thing and they kind of did more back then with each other, but it like just someone that you're not that they keep saying that they're not friends, but they seem acquainted enough. Like when your girlfriend is or his girlfriend is one of your best friends, that like you guys are gonna interact enough that like even if you're not friends, you're associated enough that you're hanging out frequently. And I imagine that they did a lot more marijuana things together though. Like for all we know, like Adnan might have been involved in it, any sort of like the selling of it too. That's just never really
right.
About.
Well, it's funny because when I was reading into that, I mean, it's in his cell phone records that this happened on Wednesdays in the afternoon several times. That he's calling, that Adnan's cell phone is calling people that Adnan didn't know. Like he has no reason to call Patrick or Kathy.
Huh.
So there's some pattern here. It's interesting that neither of them fessed up to that, but this is Baltimore. And if they were dealing with an actual drug dealer, not some, kid selling to his buddies, but somebody that like is a real drug dealer in Baltimore, they would probably both be smart enough never to mention it, because back then that is what Baltimore was. That's why there were so many bodies in Lincoln Park, probably.
But I would think that Adnan would say something now, right? Or to me, unless he has to his lawyers and it's just something that they've decided to not reveal ever. But
maybe, or it totally possible that his lawyers are like, no, we're not going to tell the jury you were like dealing drugs with Jay. Because that's funny, because when I was reading that, it made me think about it, and it's so true that like back in that time frame, when you saw a teenage boy with a cell phone, everybody's parents were like, what is he, a drug dealer? Like, need a cell phone.
Well, originally it was like a few years before that, it would have been pagers. Right. You would have been like, oh, you're a drug dealer, you have a pager. Like either you're a doctor or you're a drug dealer. And especially if you're young, that would be the assumption. You were a drug dealer.
So just something I wanted to know too, that's as far as like who could have killed Hae, and we can get into this later on, but sort of walking through the timeline, there was also a literal serial killer around, like who's someone who
literal serial killer
who strangled someone else a short time before Hae died too. Like there was, and it's just like, but that's unfathomable to like the guilters and stuff though. But it's just, I would say that for an Occam's razor thing, when there's a serial killer going around strangling other people, and you think that this Hae was strangled, I don't know. I'd say that's kind of an Occam's razor here.
Yeah. Well, and then there was also the guy that was released accidentally.
Yeah, I forget the names. They're.
But yeah, he was. That's enough for reasonable doubt. He was released a few days before she went missing, and he was supposed to be transferred for I think a murder case actually. So it's like. Yeah, that's another thing where it's like it's reasonable doubt. There's so much reasonable doubt.
There's
from so many sides.
I forget who is who now, but the Roy Lee Davis, and then there was like two guys. Like there was the serial killer, and I don't remember if that was one of them, but there was the one guy, like another one who was sexual assaultist. I don't remember if he murdered people too, but like he was accidentally released. There's also like the bank that Hae frequently went to deposit or like get cash out of, the ATM.
She only had like $8 in her account.
So then, and she never deposited her paycheck either from the previous 2 weeks. So if she was going to stop on the way, and that was like the one that she seemed to go to, and it was on the way to her cousin's school, I think it was Roy Davis or some one of those murderers or rapists lived across the street from that ATM. So there's also like, here's this connection that could be possible.
That could be why Hae changed her mind if she really did say she would give him a ride, is that she realized, oh, I still have my paycheck. I need to go deposit my paycheck. I'm almost out of money in my bank account. I don't have time if I need to pick up my cousin and go to the bank. I can't do that. Sorry, Adnan, I have something else I need to do. Like that's reasonable as a thing that happened for Hae that day. That's possible.
Especially because that's why I was wondering how long it takes for her to get to her cousin's school. Because if you get out around 2:15 and you don't have to pick up your cousin till 3, like it's 45 minutes. Why wouldn't she have time to do like oh, I can't drop off or like take one friend to somewhere, whether it was Adnan or someone else, but like, what are you doing in that meantime? Like, how long does it take you to get to the school? And someone in chat's asking, what about Jay? He helped him bury her. What about his testimony? What do you mean? Like, that's what we've been discussing, Jay, so far, but what do you mean about his testimony? We're talking about how much his story has changed in multiple testimonies and statements and things too, how he admitted to lying numerous times, and how he seems like a very unreliable source about anything.
And that the way in which the detectives conducted his testimony was not really on the up and up. I wouldn't consider it. So.
No, you have the tapping, you have the lead, like where he doesn't remember anything, and they have to like help him out to like remember how this is the thing
There
that
was
you
one
did?
point where the detective is just asking him questions and he just goes, yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, like, are these the things that you're like, oh, yeah,
Right,
he gave us
yeah.
all this information, and he just says yes to everything? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is
And
ridiculous.
in the fact that the detectives involved in his interviews have gotten in trouble for leading other witnesses and for both threatening them with punishment or giving them something that they want. Like, I'm sorry, I don't trust them. I don't trust the testimony.
Well, and they got him to testify by, like, I mean, he pled guilty to, or like admitted he was guilty to accessory after the fact. Jaded.
Oh, right.
And then eventually he was just put on probation.
But and the thing is, though, is that the day he goes for his like plea and sentencing and everything, he doesn't have a lawyer, and the prosecutor's office brings him a lawyer. And we're not talking about a public defender. This was a pro bono, private defense attorney that he brought him, and it's like,
and this is the
when does
prosecutor's
that
office,
happen?
right? Like,
yeah, that never happens.
You're working against yourself.
That's so unusual that it
Yes.
calls into question
Well,
everything.
Christina Gutierrez also, yeah, like she
caught
called
that.
it out. One of the few things she, actually called out.
Yeah.
Can we pause and talk about her for a minute too?
Oh yeah.
So she was a well-known. Well, actually, let me answer. Judge is asking if we would recommend the HBO documentary. I've only seen the 2.5 out of 4 episodes, but yes, I would. I'm gonna finish it here within the next day or so too, though. But like, the one part made me cry, but I'm an easy crier. But so Christina Gutierrez, well-known, well-respected defense attorney. Like she like, people feared her. like she was really good at what she did, but not in Adnan's case, and not in like a few other, especially around that time too. Like, so she was apparently sick, and people didn't know how bad it was. She took on too many cases. She couldn't handle them. She dropped the ball in so many ways for this case, especially. She didn't get witnesses like Asia McLean, like where she could have been an alibi.
And she didn't get her own expert witnesses to counter the state's witnesses. And she literally at the same time was doing another case that the state of Maryland decided that she did screw up and paid out to the people who had hired her. So that is evidence to show that she was screwing up. Like, she screwed up in that case that happened at the same time. So the likelihood that she screwed up here on Adnan's case is highly likely. And I would say is proven by everything we've seen.
Yeah. What else? I mean, there's so much more about like a bunch of specific details as far as like what she did wrong and didn't follow up with. But like a big thing was the potential alibis, like other witnesses, everything that she just did not, like, long list of people at Adnan's mosque who probably could have vouched for his whereabouts for different things that they never were contacted. Like, just so many people that were never contacted. And it was just really sad that that Adnan just happened to be one of the people at the time where she was just really, and eventually she was disbarred too, like within the next couple of years or something. And then she died a few years later, but she was disbarred before that. And so it was just unfortunate. It was unlucky that happened. So with that, so not even just with everything else, with you've got the detectives and prosecutors, you've got like the defense that's kind of working against you.
Right. Okay. So this is Hae's car. They arrested Adnan the day they found, or Jay took them to the car. And his story is that they parked this car here after they buried her body.
Oh yeah,
But he also said that the car was in a place that he would have passed on the regular, so he could have found it as well. Like it's a really
right. But this is January, February in Maryland. It's cold. It's like the ground is usually pretty hard most of that time of year. They had a big ice
snow
storm.
Day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a snow day the next day, 14th.
Right. So, one thing that a lot of people have pointed out about this picture of her car when they found it is that there's green grass underneath it,
mm-hmm.
which is not possible in the winter here. If it had been there for, from the middle of January through February, there's no chance. There's no way that there's green grass under that car.
Another thing in the HBO documentary too is that they interview one of the private detectives interviews a woman who's lived in that area, like in the neighborhood. Like I think she was right nearby, like where you can like see that lot area from like her home, and she's lived there for 45 years. And they asked her if could a car that had been sitting, could a car sit there for like 6 weeks without anyone like doing anything? And she said no, like that, like she and another, like they would have called 311. They would have like had like someone would have come out to tow it, like sitting there for 6 weeks. There's no way that a car would be there for that long.
Tiny trunk.
Oh yeah, there's a picture of the trunk. Where is it? There we go.
She was like,
she's not laying down flat in there. Yeah. That's just like a lacrosse stick. Those aren't that big, and it takes up like half the trunk.
Yeah, she would have to be like fetal position face down at the, like, I don't know where all it, but like if it was anterior or if like on her front.
Right. Like how, and which is like such a weird, awkward way to shove somebody in a trunk.
Yeah,
right?
you wouldn't put them on their side or somehow like that. They would crumple up. If I were to murder someone and stuff them in my trunk, I would definitely
put
them on their side.
And then, and they did do, forensics on her and their car, right? And they didn't find any, like all they found from Adnan was a partial palm print on a map book in her back seat, right?
Yeah, but they implied during the case that his fingerprints were on the map of like the part.
They just said that his were the only ones that they found on there. Like they were all like in her car and stuff. And like, yeah, he was the ex-boyfriend. They would be on there. And they misled the jurors that like there weren't any other fingerprint, which also seems weird too. Like, hey, why wouldn't your cousin have fingerprints in there? Why wouldn't anyone else? Like people rode in your car. Why would it only be Adnan? And why would it be Adnan if he was wearing those gloves?
Yeah, I know.
Right? Why would he wipe it down?
Yeah, both he was wearing gloves and he put his fingerprints all over the place. Like, no, that's not.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
Such shoddy police work. If people were trying to like defend, even in the podcast too, where it was just like, well, they might have had good intentions and just thought like, this is your guy, like this, we fully believe that he's the one who committed this, and so then you get that tunnel vision. But I don't care if I've always said that like intention is important, so I can be a little bit more forgiving to people who aren't intentionally trying to do something bad. However, that doesn't mean that like you're totally off the hook though. Like just because you're not intentionally thinking this guy's innocent, but we're going to pin this on him, you're still bad at your job, and this like you should not be doing, like, and you need to be punished, and you should not be a detective anymore if this is how you do the work that you're doing though.
The thing is that the intention, not the intention of I want to convict this innocent man, but the intention of I want to skip corners and finagle things.
Yeah. It's in
a possible capital murder case or life in prison murder case. That intention alone is actually bad. So there is no good intention there. If you are literally skipping things and screwing things up and finagling things on purpose, in murder cases,
that's
your intention is bad.
I don't know if or would I say the intention is bad, because like you think that like this guy really did it and we just need to like kind of bend the rules to show that he did do it, like, but I think I still say like that your intention is, but like you're not a good person in doing that and lying and bending the rules, like even
Definitely
if you
not
still
ethical.
intend wanting, yeah,
right,
but like maybe that intention is still good in that sense that like you, even if you believe it, but like clearly if you're willing to lie and bend the rules and make up a bunch of stuff though, like then you're not a good person at all. And especially I just don't understand, like, again, if they really believed it and like thought that he was guilty, why would you need to like force all these things and try to like make everything fit your narrative? Like, why is there not a point that you would stop and think, if we have to keep doing all this to make it seem like he did it, maybe he didn't do it? Like,
right.
Well, see, that's why after a while, a repeated mistake becomes intended.
Yeah.
That's the thing, and we have to
agree.
remember they've done this several times. These detectives.
Yes, and they've gotten in trouble before. Oh, I forgot. The one detective, he's on the documentary. He's willing, I forget which one is it. Did I write it down? Detective, was it Massey? Hang on a second. Sorry, I probably didn't even write the name down anywhere, but whatever his name is. So he's on there, and Detective Massey. Oh yeah, it is Massey. So
he'll talk to HBO, but
yeah,
nobody else.
There were a couple detectives. Like one was honestly, I thought they were like all white. I just kind of pictured them, but like Massey's black, and there might have been there was one white one. There might have been one that was like Hispanic. I don't know, but Massey. So he, I'm super biased here because like obviously after hearing everything, I don't know like what to make of them exactly, but he came off as like sketchy in like in a fake way, because he was like kind of doing this like, well, this is how we do it, like in a court, and answering things this way and trying to I don't know, it was just like he seemed like trying to be intelligent, but he might not be. And then at one point it finally hit me and I was like, oh, your facial expressions, you were like with your eyebrows raising and like your smiles and you're trying to like answer an awkward question, you remind me of Kamala Harris. He just legitimately, like, now I can't unsee it now, like just like the way he's like presenting himself and just like, oh yeah, murder. It was just like and I'm like, nope, yeah, you're definitely a sketchy man, trying to not be.
Right, that's like, it reminds me of in Serial when they reached out to the prosecutors to see if they would talk to the show, and they were like, no, but he did it for sure. Like, he for sure did it, but we're not going to talk to you. Which I get, like, I understand, like, because I mean, at that time Adnan was still appealing stuff, so they don't want to like mess anything up by talking
they can't talk to them,
right? And it's like, you know, at the time podcasts were a thing, but for me and a lot of people I know, like, Serial put podcasts on the map. After listening to that, then I was like, oh, podcasts are great. But like, it's the cops and the prosecutors being like, he did it for sure, and it's like, okay, well then why is your investigation so like messed up in so many ways? If you're positive he did it, how do you know that? On the basis of your shady eyewitness who lied constantly? Or is there some evidence that they couldn't like admit to court? But you know, but at that point though, what could that possibly be? Like, what could they have that they weren't allowed to use in court? You know, so it sounds like they just all had that attitude, like, this is the guy that did it, nothing else matters.
Which is what all the prosecutors do, like, once, like, because they have a similar thing as like the students did too, like, well, he was convicted, so he must have been guilty, without like even knowing everything.
Was this the thing that's why I'm mad about this case and several of the Baltimore cases, is because there is a pattern of behavior from the detectives and the prosecutors, and that's why I say a mistake often, you know, repeated over and over again is then intentional, because it's like eventually like it's because of the fact that your subconscious is fighting against this. It's saying, okay, we have to prove that we're right, but we keep having to make all these weird backflips and gymnastics to get it done. Your subconscious is going to be telling you that you're wrong. That's the problem. So to me, I'm sort of like, whether or not you are willing to even consider on a cognizant basis that this might be wrong, that you part of you does know it's wrong, but you keep doing it and you got away with it. So then you do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. And that's why I'm saying intent is borne out by repeated behavior.
Yeah, no,
and that's our real problem
with
the Baltimore cases, is that they definitely are responsible with foreknowledge.
And that I've heard too that like with them just trying to close cases, like they get so many, everyone's murdering everyone. And I've heard, and I don't know, like I had heard stats, but then they weren't verified, so I won't say them. But like I have heard that like the national average for murder cases being solved is like 62%, and then Baltimore's is apparently very high though. Like so unless they're like really really good detectives, they're just like trying to like, we're gonna put someone away and then say that like, yep, we've closed this case,
which is impressive considering one of the people talking about finding Hae's body in Lincoln Park said, like, Lincoln Park is like, if you go to bury a body there, you're probably going to run into somebody else's body while you're burying yours. Like, that's the kind of park this was.
I'm just
and yet they're just solving all of these. All of these are solvable.
You've got them with like shovels passing by and just like dragging their body.
That area is full, dude. Go that way.
Like, oh, this is my spot. You're gonna go find a different spot to bury your body. This is my territory.
But I mean, it's funny. I don't know, because growing up, like in Maryland, just outside of DC, it's still like this. Like the area is very just Baltimore, DC.
Dead bodies everywhere. Oh.
Like I was definitely always more a DC girl, but grew up. I mean, they're only 20-something miles apart, Baltimore and DC. So Baltimore, we're always aware of all the shenanigans going on in Baltimore, and from a young age, I knew the Baltimore police were corrupt. I mean, these are the kind of things that the community knows. Like, you better watch out if you ever get a call from Baltimore police, because they frame people or they're really shady, like that kind of stuff. And I actually used to know a guy who was a Baltimore detective for several years, and he said he got forced out because the other detectives were doing some shady stuff and he wouldn't participate.
The good ones leave.
Yeah, and so he got
if they're outnumbered, they end up leaving. Yeah.
Well,
and we're seeing that with the FBI, with the whistleblowers that have been coming out, and they're outnumbered. They know they are.
Right.
Yeah. When we were talking about like the cell phone stuff too, we didn't get into the technical things about that when we were saying like placement wise, but as we said earlier, that it was they only got the outgoing calls, and the sheets that they left out though was the cover sheet, and it wasn't found until Susan Simpson and Undisclosed came across it, and like no one else in years had seen it, but like it had a note on the cover sheet saying that the outgoing calls cannot be used to like track location. So, and that was everything that they used to like help to say like Jay's story coincides with all of the cell phone data, and that's how the prosecutors were able to convince the jury and say like, well, like Jay's statement alone doesn't, but it's backed up by the cell phone data, but they couldn't even do that, and the data itself, they took he was like an AT&T or like some sort of cell phone guy to like test out these pings. They did like the prosecution went in a car in a day, and like they made like thousands of calls at different points to like test out the pings in the towers, and they took like out of like the thousands, they took 13 of them, and the guy who was like doing the measuring didn't write down anything either, though, because the prosecution was just like, no, because if they wrote it down they'd have to give it to the defense, so the prosecution just made notes of it instead, so they didn't have the cell expert write anything down. So they
Also,
only
they
took
didn't
13.
they also tested only from the like outside, versus if you're in a building, cell phone tower pings would be different. That does affect that data. And also the time and the amount of actual calls being made at the time would affect what cell towers
that
would be pinged.
Everything. There's so many different things that would affect, like there are so many factors that would affect it, and they just cherry picked the data that matched what best fit their story, and then they made up an entire case that couldn't be refuted because of like lack of actual info, which is weird because that like reminds me again of like stuff that's been going on in the last couple of years, where it's just like, here's some like information that can't be backed up, or they're gonna like just pick and choose what they want. But
if you don't document anything, you can't.
Then you can't be wrong.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. They did the same thing with when they found her body. Like the medical examiners didn't write their report. Like they wrote like a paragraph, but they didn't write like a detailed thing like you normally would. And like it's because if they did that, they would have to give that to the defense in trial. So again, that was their way of not having to provide the defense with all the information that the prosecutors have, which means that they can
but this is at the beginning of like when you just find the body, with that before you even have anyone.
It was basically policy for them at that point that they like they were like, let's just not write anything down. That way we can.
That's why there's so many of these cases that are wrongful convictions, is because it was as I said, a pattern of behavior. They have these like policies in place where they don't have to document things so that they don't have discovery issues. The problem is that even with the little bit of documentation that the state made, they still had discovery issues because they still didn't reveal everything they had to the defense.
Yeah, which is what those are Brady violations, right? When they should have disclosed something and they didn't, but then they find loopholes to try and avoid it. But then there were plenty of things that would have been. It reminds me of like the one episode in Undisclosed. They talk about they do an inmate prison interview of people who were able to listen to the podcast Serial and Undisclosed. And one of the things that one of the guys said that made me so sad was that he said it was surprising to see that this case got so much attention, because it's something that they see all the time in there, and like all the time that innocent people are incarcerated all the time. So it's just so heartbreaking.
Well, to me, I feel what makes me sad about what's going on with what has been going on with Baltimore in all this time is that being the victim of a crime or connected to a victim of a crime will put your life in danger, essentially. Like the guy who his daughter was shot in his car, that Undisclosed went over, and then he ended up being convicted of it. It's like, it's just so tragic to go through something so horrible and then be re-victimized by the state. And it's like, you can't see, like, a lot of people go, well, just don't do anything untoward. And it's like, yeah, sure. But if you are literally victimized and the state decides you did it, there's nothing you can do about random crime. Like, and then you can't really do much about the state deciding you're related to this random crime. We want to close this case, so you're going to be our, sacrificial lamb. It's like, there's no way around that. I know a lot of people like to say that it's like, just don't do anything you shouldn't do. as a way of protecting yourself. And it's like that you could literally be the victim of a crime, and this be
well, if you don't do anything bad, then like why you don't have anything to hide, then why can't you just let the government be involved in everything about your like data and stuff too? If you're not doing anything, because they're super trustworthy. So like,
right, they would never do anything wrong.
Then you won't get in trouble.
And that's I'm going to say this right now. Do not let the police search your vehicle or your home without a warrant. Even if you have supposedly nothing to hide, don't do it.
And at this point, I would record everything too. Like if you have phones, and like I don't know what they'd say, that they say like you're not allowed to. I don't know if you can argue against it, but
well, like where? Like that would have to be a jurisdictional thing. I think in certain states there are laws that you can't record somebody without their knowledge.
Yeah, I don't know what if it is when it's the like two. What is it? If you need the permission to like record, like what is it, like one way or the two-way recording? So I don't know how that works as far as police officers go. They'll like if they could say that like you don't have my permission, so you can't, but then they get away with everything.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, yeah, that's rough. I mean, over the past few years is when I got really into true crime stuff. Not out of a morbid curiosity, more of like I'm a patterns person. So the more cases I see, the more the patterns start to pop out of behaviors and red flags, warning signs, that kind of stuff. And I have to say, before I started on that, I totally had faith in the justice system. And, I was like, okay, it's potentially like sometimes there's a fluke and somebody's wrongfully convicted. At this point, if the police wanted to interview me on something, I would literally be like, cool, can I bring my lawyer?
I'm gonna get a lawyer. Yep.
No, you don't even have to don't ask. Just say, all right, I'm bringing my lawyer.
Why do you need a lawyer? Because I know.
Yeah, because then they think that, oh, you must be guilty because you
I'd be like, because I have a constitutional right to have one here. Thank you very much.
Because of all the wrongful convictions that there are, I just don't want to take any risks. Yeah.
And I've seen so many. I mean, they do this all the time. Like they trip people up and kind of trick them into saying things that seem incriminating, even if they're not. And then they can get a warrant or a subpoena or whatever,
Well, it's this thing. I'm a skeptic. Like, I've always been very skeptical. And one of the reasons why is because it's like, when it comes to science,
toward what?
Towards everything. So that's the thing.
Everything.
Like,
just any information that. Okay.
And like, see, the reason why is because the justice system, science, journalism, and all of these things have a human element. And you can't, I mean, even social media, how they work, I mean, the algorithms that they write, someone wrote those. So to me, I'm sort of like, there's always a human element. And as long as there's a human element, there will be human error and there will be human intention. Well, and you can't work around the idea that some people are assholes.
Yes. Well, that's why, I mean, like, I've always been skeptical and whenever anyone like gives me information, like facts about things though too, I've always like not trusted like friends and stuff where I'm just like I'll go along with it, but then like I immediately look it up too because most of the time I'm like, you're probably wrong. Like people just like they think that they have information and like usually like, oh, that's just like a rumor, or that's a myth that people think is true. And so like no matter what, like I've always like fact checked for everything though too, because I'm just like, well, and it gets tough for me because there are people where I'm like, oh, like you are a super smart person, so I just kind of like automatically trust what you say, but then I'm like, I shouldn't do that. Like I need to like double check you too, because like you just never know. Like, and you might be intelligent and knowledgeable in one subject though, but like maybe other things that like, yeah, like you don't know this as much, so like of course I should.
Or you have an emotional flaw that would cause you to buy something more than something within a specific subject.
Sure. Yeah. You might be more gullible to something just because of whatever your personal situation you have. Yeah.
Right.
What was another thing that yeah, just generally, I think it's sad that we need innocence projects everywhere, like in every state, because it's just like the fact that they're necessary because they're wrongfully convicted people, like means that the system is flawed and that that we need to fix it.
I mean, I remember this was a couple of years ago. I read something about witness testimony and everything, where they have those books of mugshots and everything, and one witness was looking through them, and then the next day she came back and she was looking through a different booklet, but that had some of the same photos as the previous booklet, and she pointed to someone that she recognized because she saw them yesterday in the previous booklet. And that's the problem. Like, I studied memory a lot because it was like, I talked to you guys a little bit about that yesterday in the Discord. Memory is a very interesting subject. And the problem is that every time you remember something, you're remembering the last time you remembered it. And so there is degradation of your memory. It's like copying a copy, and you copied it again, and then you copy it, and you just keep copying a copy. So if you're trying to remember something that happened 6 weeks ago, and if you're trying to recognize someone that you saw once, I mean, it's not great. It's not reliable. It's absolutely not reliable. And it's very easy to manipulate. And someone tells you, well, you pointed that person, so that must be the person that you saw that day. And you go and you convince yourself, I guess that's true. That sounds like it could be right, because I do recognize them. And that's the problem, is that we're also easily manipulated. We're so suggestible. That's the reason why hypnosis is able to happen, because we are so easily suggestible. So to me, I'm sort of like, you put those two things together, it's very, very hard to rely on witness testimony.
Absolutely.
I am, with just the brain and memories being so malleable, I just would not. I don't trust anything that, like, you forget things, and you're susceptible too. So if someone just starts like saying something like, "Oh, remember how that girl had that pin on her shirt and stuff too," and like, so like you can implant memories into people, though, just because if they like you describe it enough, and then they just think that they remember it, and it's like I just don't trust eyewitness testimonies ever.
No, and you shouldn't, honestly, because like this is a thing I've noticed in myself. Like, I have this thing with faces where, like, if you look kind of similar to somebody else I already know, like, you go in that category in my brain forever. And when I try to picture their faces, they kind of just mesh into one person. It's like a weird thing. I don't know why I do that, but so for me, if I was an eyewitness and they asked me like what this person looked like, I would for sure give you a wrong description.
I cannot
it would be
describe,
like close, maybe, but maybe like defining features. But I would definitely, the more I thought about it, the less accurate it would become.
This has happened to me on multiple occasions, where I call it that someone has been recast, because like I'll meet them and then like and not see them for a long time, and then when I see them again, I'm like, you're a different person. You're not the same person who I met before. Like, and that's happened to me a few times, where I'm just like,
that would be really freaky.
Yeah, I get freaked out by it.
What's going on here?
That's the thing too, is that people's brains are different, and their capacities to remember things and to picture things that they've seen before, we all have different levels of that. Studying the brain is like a hobby, partially because of my learning disability and because it's based on your brain. And so to me, I'm sort of like, we all, like, you cannot treat all witness testimony on the same level. Like, it's not like, first of all, is the person blind? That's step one. Like that one case where she said she was legally blind. So so there's a lot of that kind of stuff, like where it's like, well, someone saw it, and it's like, yeah, is that person, first of all, are they able to see very well? Number two, how is their recall? Number three, were they led at all? Like, there's so much involved in that. Like, you cannot take us all of our ability to picture someone and remember them as even. It's not even. It's so disparate that it's not as reliable as people think it is. And it's like, I know also how much adrenaline is going through your brain really affects your ability to recall things.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another part of it, is that it's like, if you're literally flooded with adrenaline, you're a lot of people think your recall will be better, and it's not actually true. Your recall, because adrenaline is supplanting your ability to make long-term memory, actually.
Interesting.
Because of the fact that it's basically saying, focus on surviving.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the adrenaline's there to just like, you're focused on just like not like whatever's going on, like your body's trying.
Focus on surviving. Don't focus. We're not putting any brain power towards converting these necessarily all perfectly to long-term memory. That's essentially what's going on there. So it's like, that's another factor. How much adrenaline were you under when you had the event happen? So it's like, there's so much going on there that it's like, it's really hard with witness testimony.
You know what I would for sure remember accurately, though, if my friend, or I'm sorry, my acquaintance, we're hardly friends, popped the trunk of his girlfriend's car and her body was in it. I think I would remember where that happened. Like Best Buy, my grandmother's house, or like on a random side street, right? Like a pool hall. I think I'd remember that pretty well.
Another thing too, just generally, I don't remember if I brought this up earlier, is that maybe we did talk about it. I'm losing track now. That we don't, why we think that Hae died on the 13th. Did I say that earlier?
No. No, but
I'll see, my memory is terrible. I can't even remember from like 2 hours ago. But but that they, so they're saying that she died on January 13th, but they find her body 6 weeks later. Yeah, I think we did say this on, I can't remember if it was on or off here now, but it's just, and then everything is set, like not even just to that time of like she was dead by 2:36. Like we don't even know for sure that day. Maybe I didn't get into this detail of it, but because the way that the medical examiner said that, like, yeah, her body seems consistent with the one that's been dead for about 4 weeks, and that can change. The factors change by environment and weather and everything. But she said like about 4 weeks. So it was 6 weeks later when they found the body. So like, I'm like, if you're give or take a couple weeks though, like she could have been alive longer than just the 13th. Like we don't even know if that was the exact day she died. So it's crazy to just like try and pinpoint like this timeline based on I don't even know, like whatever things that the detectives just made up, who again, the detectives were known to have convicted innocent people prior to this. Like they had already gotten found, like they knew that there are other cases where they had innocent people that were convicted.
So the only reason that they stuck with the 2:36 call is the incoming call to Adnan's cell phone at 2:36.
Yeah.
Like that's why they think Hae was dead by then.
Yeah. Was it incoming or outgoing? Oh no, incoming to his cell phone because of the because he was calling from the Best Buy payphone that didn't exist, that everyone that no one remembers had existed.
And one
in
girl
the vestibule outside.
Yeah, and then later on, it wasn't even at Best Buy. So where
right? Well,
where
and there was one girl they talked to that was like adamant there was definitely no payphone because she used to shoplift from that Best Buy, so she was like scoping it out the whole time, which is a hilarious admission. But I kind of tend to believe her, because if the store manager doesn't remember whether or not there was a payphone, I would guess there wasn't one, because again, 1999, people didn't have cell phones. People did have pagers, and if there were a payphone, I would think it would have been
used and like noticed.
Yeah, it would be something that there were people talking on it frequently. I
Yeah.
vividly remember exactly where there were two payphones, like where I grew up. One was at a Rite Aid and one was at a 7-Eleven, and I could tell you exactly where they were, like on the outside of the building.
I can tell you where the payphones were at the Superstition Springs Mall in Gilbert, Arizona.
Yep. See, it's like one of those things, if it's there back before cell phones, you knew where it was because you had to call people that way.
I did. I literally called someone on one of those payphones, and that's partially how I remember. And that was back in like 2003.
I don't think I've used a payphone.
Really? I used to call my mom from the movie theater on the payphone.
I don't remember. No, I think I had a cell phone by the time I was like 14. I think around then. But you guys are a few years older than me too, so maybe.
Yeah, there were still payphones around when I was in high school.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so I don't think I need. I didn't pay attention to it because I don't think I needed. And under that age, I don't think I really had to call. I was like, oh, you're picked up at this time or whatever. So I don't think I really had to do phone call. I didn't go places either, so that helped.
I would go by myself by bus to the Superstition Springs Mall on a regular basis and like walk around it, like just by myself. And then like once, but the bus I had to take stopped going after 6 o'clock, and I missed it once.
Oh.
So I had to call my parents to come pick me up. And I'm like, I know that I said I can't remember what I did 6 days ago, but I remember that day.
Right. Specific things but
I don't remember what day of the week it was, though. I don't remember, like, I couldn't give you a date. Like, it's just a story to me. Like, it's floating in the ether of my high school years.
Like I remember this like memory, but I don't know when. Yeah,
I couldn't put it on a calendar.
And if I did go places, I'm in a small town, so you could just walk everywhere too, though. So it's like we didn't have buses to ride or anything, though. It was just kind of like, or we had at a friend's house, so then I'm just calling from their house phone, and so it was. I don't think a payphone was ever on my radar, so that's why I'm like, I don't remember. Like, what's wrong with me if I don't remember? Everyone else has memories of payphones.
Oh, payphones! Oh, what a time to be alive.
So as I'm trying to look at my other notes, as I was taking, my notes are so scattered and there is no organization at all. But one thing I want to note is there was nothing about Hae's car in their notes either, like, which could have been super helpful as far as like position of seat, like how far back was the seat, how tall was the person who was driving it somewhere, like anything that could have been helpful. I just like, and hearing, not only did the detectives form a lot of things to like make their case, they just lacked the skill of writing anything down that could have been actually useful. I was like, so many people, like we have all the armchair detectives, like so many of us would be better at trying to solve this crime than they were. Like, I don't understand how they got their job at all when you're like just not any sort of detail in anything at all. And and anything where I'm just like, how do you get this job? Like, how, for any position, not just detectives, but when I see that a lot, I'm like, how are you working here?
Right. Well, I mean, like I think they didn't pull her pager stuff, like her, the logs of like who had paged her.
We don't even know where her pager.
Oh yeah, that's right.
They never recovered it.
Oh, so it was always
gone. And
her
keys weren't in the car either.
I knew that, the keys were missing. I couldn't remember what happened to the pager. I thought they found her like wallet or purse or something at one point, but I didn't know if they found the pager.
They never found it.
I have another note that said that like why is Jay still lying now? Because like when 2014 he didn't want to like really interview with anyone, and I think he did
Right.
kind of a serial, but then at one point there was someone that reached out for an interview, I forget where it was, and he's like, I'm not afraid of the truth, but then he later like declined the interview. I'm like, it seems like you're afraid if you're deciding not to do it.
Oh wait, do you guys the shirt with blood on it in her car?
Oh yeah, that red and blue jacket, and then or is that a different?
There's like a polo shirt, clearly a guy's shirt, but it had like a little bit of like saliva. That's the thing that they found, that they were like, that when they talk to people about it, they're like, oh, it's an overdose.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Like, to me,
because
it looks like a boy's shirt. And they've never identified whose shirt it is, but it's like, I'm sorry, most laundry machines are not actually that phenomenal. Like, you should be able to get something off of that shirt.
Why didn't they say then too that they thought that like, oh, it was just while she was being strangled that like the saliva and blood came up on it immediately, but then their medical exam or someone, they were saying later on in like podcasts that like, no, it's unlikely that would have happened immediately after. Like if it were to come up, it would come up at a later time, not immediately at death. And
right.
So that whatever it was, like, could have been useful, because like who knows like what that was supposed to be. But there was also like the red and blue jacket too that they found that like they talked about, but then it didn't fit the story. So like Jay's narrative, he just had to like write it out that like oh, what's this jacket, who knows, they tossed, and like Adnan threw it away, like who cares, we don't know. Right. So it was just like, okay. Let's see.
Why is Jay still lying? Right. So he gave the interview to The Intercept, and
oh yeah. So that was, I was just saying that like when it was a different interview because he didn't do The Intercept, but when he was just saying that like he's not afraid of the truth, but then he doesn't actually do the interview. I'm like, I think you're afraid of the truth, and now he's telling a different story with The Intercept when he's just saying like, actually, here's the real truth when I lied before. And
right, in that one he changes the burial to midnight.
Yeah, because he had to, because of the lividity that came out.
Right. Isn't that interesting? After the trials and stuff. But he and then he also has this like convoluted story of how Adnan says Jay has to help him, or Adnan's gonna tell the cops Jay has like pounds of marijuana in his house, which if any part of that is true, like Jay was not a petty high school drug dealer. They don't have pounds of weed. So that was a weird thing for him to say, like, in my opinion. But okay, so they get the shovels, they go out to this place, and he says they dug for like 40 minutes. And then Adnan was like barely digging,
40,
being lazy.
I thought he said 20, and I was like, how is that enough time to like dig like a hole for a human body? I've had to dig holes for like rabbits and chickens.
Oh my gosh, and it's horrible. Isn't that fun? And then he said that it started raining, so he was like, screw this, I'm done. And Adnan's like, well, are you gonna help me get her body out of the car? And Jay's like, no, I'm not touching it. So they do some funny like shuffle of the cars.
Yeah.
And then Adnan's in the woods for like 45 minutes by himself, burying the body. And then Jay takes him home. That's like the new narrative on this, which
I also just don't understand why, if Jay didn't do anything, why was he necessary? Adnan could have just taken the car had like, was it just the shovel? He just needed Jay's shovel to be able to like bury this body poorly, that like they didn't even do a good job.
Shovel they didn't go looking for like a month.
Yeah. And so I was just like, I don't understand what the point of having Jay there participate in this when he claims that he didn't really do it. Like sometimes he helps out with the digging, sometimes he doesn't. But then it's like, if he did so little, he's not even necessary. The only thing would be like at the end, like saying like, I guess when you're going to drop off the car somewhere to go hide it, then maybe you want a ride from somewhere, but like you don't need it with the rest of it.
But like, I mean, if Adnan is so smart that he managed to pull this off, and the only thing that undid him, they have no physical evidence whatsoever. They have junk cell phone data that's like absolutely not usable in court anymore. And Jay, so like he's so smart, he managed not to leave any evidence. Totally would have gotten away with it, but he called this guy that's not his friend and asked him to help him bury a body. Like, none of that makes sense. If you had killed somebody in a fit of rage, like, honestly, you're the smart thing to do is tell nobody and figure it out yourself.
And if it was premeditated, if it was premeditated, as they also said, you wouldn't pick Jay to be your accomplice.
Yeah, especially because he's blabbing it to everyone, and then allegedly Adnan is blabbing it to different people. But like Jay just kept like friends would say, like, yeah, Jay was telling me about this. Though, like, why are you lying about this? Like, and just because you're trying to like, you know that you're already working with the cops in this regard, so you have to like spread it around and say like so that way everyone else believes that this is what happened because you need them to believe it, for you to like save yourself with the cops. Or are you just pathological and you're wanting to lie and because like that's what you do.
And that's the thing, he did tell stories a lot. And like maybe it's totally possible that Jay just like decided, I'm going to tell everyone that Adnan was involved, and that starts a rumor mill that gets to the police, and then they get involved, and it's like, it is entirely possible that this is that Adnan, the finger is pointed at Adnan because of the kind of spin shit that Jay did before.
That's what I wasn't sure about, whether he was already lying about this before the police came to see him, or if the police came and then he started like spreading these rumors around, because I don't know the timeline of like when he was telling people about these things. But like either way, I would just say that he's lying about it. Like either before the police, he's just like, I'm inserting myself because like I want to sound cool and I lie about things, or the police were involved and he's like, I need to try and like get other people to believe that this is my story, so I'm going to spread it around and get them. I don't know, but then we can also talk about more recently too. It wasn't in the podcast, but it was in the documentary. Jay, in recent years, like they meet up with an ex-girlfriend of his who had left him because, and I'll say too, like he's been arrested a bunch of times, but like not convicted, and or like his punishments were really light, like based on the crimes that were committed, and or so like something is weird that like he's getting away with a lot of things that like you otherwise wouldn't expect. And one of these things was domestic violence. His ex-girlfriend was beaten up, and she has pictures after like of her eye, like she was punched in the eye by him. She said like he was drunk and it was in the car, and like he punched her like with their son in the back seat, and but eventually like she mentioned it at one point the first time. So then later on, like she said that like he went in to get prescription for their son, they thought like at a Rite Aid or whatever, and then she drove off and just never looked back, and so like she left him. And so yeah, he and then so far with Adnan in prison, he hasn't been known to have any violence toward anyone ever, like that people like him. He hasn't had, the only thing that he has gotten in trouble for was having a cell phone in prison when he wasn't,
and then for 5 years. Serial recording
and the serial, that like and then but so Jay has had a lot more problems, and he has the domestic violence and like other ones too, were like assaulting a cop or resisting arrest and these things and getting physical with them. So there's just been a lot more with him that makes Jay seem a lot more suspicious with everything than Adnan has. Also like there are things that like, I don't know, just like the nice things that you hear about with Adnan too. There was, I forget who Omar was. Oh, it was a friend of Adnan's that called in to the Truth and Justice podcast with Bob Ruff. And so it was a friend, and like Omar hadn't talked to Adnan like 4 or 5 years since he was in prison, but his dad passed away. And then like Omar happened to see one of Adnan's brothers, and he had a letter from Adnan to Omar to say, like, I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, I think, I have fond memories of your dad. So it's just like, here are these like thoughtful things that he does. And obviously that's not a thing of like, oh, he's nice, so he could never commit a crime like that. Like, no, but along with believing that he's likely innocent, and because there's no evidence to show otherwise, it just makes me even sadder to know that he seems like a nice guy who's in prison.
Yeah. Aww.
That's what it's called. The blood from that shirt was the pulmonary edema, right? That was the term. What else is there that I wanted to go? A stray thought too is that one of the things that they said that Hae had that wrestling match on the 13th, and the interview that she had, but then that was when they Undisclosed podcast looked it up, it was actually on the 5th. But that was like already part of their story too, but no one ever questions that because the defense didn't do anything with it. Like, so that was really obnoxious. So many things that were just so aggravating.
Well, one of the things is the police didn't really interview like some of the people that knew Adnan and Hae at school until they had already arrested him.
Right.
Which is gonna taint their memory. It's like, oh, well, now things that you would have never even brought up are like, oh, well, maybe if he's guilty, this meant something and I didn't notice at the time.
That's what I said earlier too, about how like things that might have just been innocuous, but now you're like, oh, well, you said this and now I see it, that like looking at it in this light, this makes it suspicious. And then you can pick a bunch of things and just make it seem that way. And it's like, well,
they do that with like this stuff about like sneaking around and doing pot and everything, and it's like he's not doing those things alone. Like the other kids that he's friends with are also doing that. So if that suggests that he's a murderer, it suggests they're all murderers. This is not evidence of his character.
Yes.
Right.
And Jay claimed to be like terrified because supposedly Adnan had threatened Stephanie and all this stuff, and but then one of their friends like vividly remembers Jay and Stephanie and Adnan coming to a party together.
Yeah, it was on the 15th. It was 2 days after the alleged murder happened.
Right.
Or the murder allegedly happened on that day, but they came together to her birthday party, and as if everything's cool, which it probably was, because I don't know, like I'm really undecided whether or not Jay was actually involved in anything, because I can also believe, because like with the corrupt cops, and Undisclosed went over it too, that there were people who were just kind of coerced into, like, because there's threat of like, hey, like something might happen to your family or loved ones or whatever, though, so you should just like tell the story, like admit to us the truth. So then they get forced into like false confessions or false testimonies as witnesses, and like those things have happened. But I don't know. I really don't know if Jay was actually involved at all, or he was just fed everything, or like he happened to know some stuff just through the grapevine of in the world, and then just like heard things and that happened to get back to the police. Like, I really don't know. Like, either way, whether he was involved or not, he lied about so many things to put away a likely innocent man. So, I mean, he's still very much not a good person, but like, I just don't know if he was involved in the murder, though.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I've always kind of felt, like, just purely speculation here, is I think someone Jay knows was involved.
Yeah,
and he heard a lot about it, and it's possible maybe parts of it are like, I've always gone back to like parts of this story are probably true. It's just not Adnan that he's talking about. So maybe somebody did make him help bury her, and he was like, no, I'm not touching the body, and like totally freaked out by it. And then that person threatened Stephanie, and he was like, that's scary. Like, you know, maybe so there was a reason for him to be scared, but then
it
like
was actually Adnan, yeah.
Right. So like, I just go back to, I mean, that, because Jay was not a magnet student. That's his neighborhood, and it's not a great neighborhood, especially on the other side of the park. It gets to like high crime rates and stuff. And even in his Intercept interview, he says like he's been trying to stay off the radar, and he's mad that they brought him into all of this because he doesn't want anything to come up like about him snitching. And he's implying that that's about snitching on Adnan, but like, I just wonder if there's something else, because there have been accusations I don't know enough about, but that he might have been like a CI.
Oh yeah, well that's what it kind of seemed like he might be recently with all of the lack of arrests or like convictions and stuff with things
Like
too.
So if say he did know somebody that, you know, did something to Hae and he was just slightly involved, then like the best thing to protect Jay from all of this is to like make sure someone else goes down for it.
Yeah, well, in one of the interviews that they did in the HBO documentary, one of the guys, I guess he was a friend of Jay's, he was saying how like Jay would be someone like, you know, get pulled over, he would do anything to like put all of the like responsibility, like the blame on the other person. Like he was not afraid to throw you under the bus to protect himself. And then he said, and that's why no one talks to Jay anymore. So he did not seem to have very fond memories of him. And like I believe it though, that like, yeah, like if he thought he was, you know, and he's threatened, he feels threatened because of the cops going out, like yeah, and they think it might be Adnan, then like, yeah, let me just make up stuff, like whatever, I'll say whatever I need to try and put the suspicion off me, even if I didn't do anything. Like he
right. Well, and the part that kind of like adds into that for me is like, so he claims that he helped bury the body because Adnan threatened to tell the police that he had tons of weed in his grandmother's house. And then
but it's
later,
like he's got a dead body. You got a dead body on him though. Like you're not going to be able to like, yeah, you got weed. Like but I murdered someone. Like I think you have leverage here.
Right. and then, you know, and then later it's like, oh, I'm terrified of him because he's going to kill Stephanie. So he's going to call the cops on you for weed and kill your girlfriend?
And it's not even just his girlfriend. It's one of Adnan's closest friends.
Right.
Like this seems so like, I guess if you can believe that he would kill Hae, then like maybe he's a psychopath to want to kill like one of his friends too. But it's just like that was not at all like a viable idea to me. So okay, so some last stray thoughts.
Since you're paused, I'm gonna duck out.
Okay, yeah, no, you're fine. We're just gonna have like closing thoughts on here. Bye, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, Alex.
All right, bye.
I was just gonna say that the prosecutor was Kevin Urich. He blatantly lied in the trial, or at least gave untruths. So like either it was intentional or he was just him being bad at his job. But either way, like the cops, he should lose his job. I don't think he's like there at least doing that job anymore. But again, like I don't care. Like if you're like just negligence or just, you know, whatever kind of mispractice of your job, like if you're not good at it, then you should not have it. Let me see what else. I think this is in one of the podcasts that I listened to, and you said, like the guy said, like it was easy to forget listening to Serial that it was a true story about real people, and that was something that I was like, I mean, like not for me. Like I take this like so I don't know personally, but like I'm so
like emotionally invested.
Yeah, emotionally invested though, because I'm like I get so worked up about it because I know that like these are real people. Like I've written to Adnan, I didn't hear back from him. I wrote to Kenny Snow, a guy that was in the one podcast briefly, because I thought he was innocent and I felt bad for. And he wrote back like I've mentioned before too that he got out on parole, so he was 40 years of not even a murder. It was a aggravated robbery that he probably didn't do. And he still he calls me every now and then to check in and stuff. So like he's doing well, he's with his family. So like I'm so happy about that. But yeah, like that's why I get kind of bothered sometimes, I mean, like not like for real, but when people are just like, oh, like, you know, like female, like women love true crime, and like, yeah, that is true, and I am interested in like the psychology of like psychopaths and stuff too. I do like that, but my interest is more in wrongful convictions, like that my passion is toward it, because like I do get emotionally invested in it, like, and it really upsets me. I'm getting choked up now thinking about it though too, that like, but like I genuinely care, and I hate that there are innocent people who are locked up.
Yeah. And once you're convicted, it's so hard to save them, even
because it's hard to prove a negative, because like if you're innocent, it's hard to prove that you didn't do something though.
Like, right, you basically have to have private investigators figure out who really did it to get them out.
And I don't want to be uncaring. Another note too that I wanted to talk about was that I feel so bad for the innocent people who have been convicted, but I also feel bad for the victims. Like I want Hae I want her murder to be solved, because it's people get upset or like, well, no, like, you know, she needs justice, and so Adnan needs to stay in there. Like, it's not justice if he didn't do it. No. So it's not justice to him, and it's not justice to Hae. That you want to find the person who actually did it and like give her like she deserves that too. So my thing with, and I'm not saying this is with her family, just generally, I wonder sometimes where like the victim's family or the other people who just want to push for that too is like, do you really want justice, or do you just want closure for the murder? Because it's hard, like it's hard for things to be open-ended, that you like, you just want to put it to rest, and it's harder to not know what happened. So sometimes you're just like, no, you want this to be true because it's just easier to get like, to get this done. But then it's not really justice though if it's the wrong person. So like even if it's painful, like I want to know the truth. Like I don't want to, if they're like, oh, this, like he might be innocent, like, okay, well, let's find out for sure.
Yeah, actually there's a case, it was on this show, it's called like The Genealogy Detective or something like that, but like she does like genetic genealogy on DNA samples to see if she can identify like the family tree and then narrow it down to who it's like probably it is. And on one episode, this woman's daughter had been murdered, and they'd convicted a guy for it, and then years later they did this, you know, DNA thing, and it wasn't him, but they didn't know who it was, and they finally narrowed it down and figured it out, but then they had to like get his DNA to prove it. And they like had like the police department was they like followed this guy around because he smoked cigarettes until they could get one of his cigarette butts. They had to see him throw it and then like wait for him to leave and go pick that one up, and they eventually, like, I guess it matched. And then the mother of the girl who had been murdered, she spent like a ton of time and effort to get the original guy who had been convicted out of prison.
Wow.
You know, for some reason the state wasn't too eager to let him out when somebody else's DNA matched, right? But it was really, it's like that one's really sweet because it's one where it's like, you know, some families, of course, they're going to want to hold on to like, well, in my head, he's the killer, so I'm going to stick to that. But others, it's like, whoa, if like he didn't do it, I'm going to fight for him to get out now.
Right. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't want like to know that my tragedy is like causing another innocent person's tragedy too.
Oh my
like
gosh,
I would just make me feel even worse. So also, as an aside, someone on Rumble who is Lil Viper.
Oh, hi Viper.
Just saying hello to you.
Hello.
So that Paul told them that you were alive. Trying to keep up with, like, I have Utreon and Rumble. I don't have Odyssey up though, but I forgot about it. Just to try and say that, like, yeah, like go watch us on these other channel, other things that are off YouTube. Like that'd be great. And Judge Lot was trying to at first, but then he was lonely on Utreon alone though. But like Utreon also does like they have Ultra Chat, so they have those. But like Utreon, they're all of these other platforms, they have some issues, but that they're working on. But like but I want to help promote them because there's only so long before we get banned
Oh,
off of
yeah.
YouTube. So I really want
Yes.
to grow over there. But anyway, with another thing, I totally forgot. I wish I brought this up while Alex was here. Can we talk about Hope Shaw? Hope Shaw. She was the French teacher. And
Oh.
and so they talked about how like she was more personal, like, you know, Hae worked with her as like an assistant or something, a teacher's assistant to her, and she was like a little bit younger, so they're like closer in age, and so she was the one that like gave questions, like the police, like they kind of like, oh, like she has more of an in, so like, can you ask like where would Hae and Adnan want to hang out, where would they, like she was already suspicious of Adnan. And so she's in the HBO documentary, and she has crazy eyes. Like, we've seen her, like, she just kind of taught, like, hey, like, yeah, like, I'm like, she seemed friendly enough, but she kind of, and I was like, I just like intuitively, like, I don't really trust you. Like, there's something about you. She talked about how like she was really upset, like, and felt bad for Adnan with Hae's death. Like, you know, he seemed upset, and so she like gave him a hug, which, you know, as a teacher, it probably shouldn't. But she was saying how like he just was so stiff, like stern, like he didn't reciprocate, and she's like, I'm not sure if it was cultural, but I
like,
took it personally. I'm like, cultural?
He's a teenage boy and he doesn't want you touching him.
Yeah, and he was also probably, like, everyone else was saying that he was like really upset by this, like, and probably like in a catatonic state, like not really wanting to be hugged by like, yeah, a teacher that's like not a close friend of his. But I also thought it was weird that she's like, I'm not sure if it was cultural, like you've seen him, like how he behaves among friends, like, you know,
Right.
that's not true, like that, like from everyone else he was just like, yeah, we're hanging out, like he was totally like an average high schooler, and like that like I'm sure you've seen him hug other people. You've seen, like, he talked about how like Stephanie, like, because he said that they were always a little bit like more than friends too, like in the sense that they kind of dated in like middle school, 8th grade briefly or something, and then but even in high school, like she would sit on his lap or like play with his hair or something like that too, like they just kind of had like a little bit more. So it's like, if you've seen that, or like and he was behaving that way with like Hae and stuff too, and they were dating, like Hae mentioned in her diary that she kissed Adnan, and so it's like, it's not cultural, like that's a weird thing to say, and like he was grieving, so it's just like, don't take it personally, but like she was, yeah, I got creepy vibes from her.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I just think that she was probably one of the people who were like, oh, I hear that like that he might be suspicious, so then she's like jumps on it because she's probably like a Karen or something that was just like, yeah, let me help you and do this.
Right.
One of the other things too in it, that the cell phone expert, they brought him back in during one of the PCR hearings, I think, and because at first he didn't, Susan Simpson was trying to like reach out to him, and then he to like ask about some data. I forget specifically what she had asked, but it was about the data, about like, can you actually like verify that this is okay to use, and I guess he reached out to Uric, the prosecutor, and he said that and then I guess like Uric was telling him, like, probably, I think they said that he was threatened. I don't know, Susan at least relayed that like he seemed like he was threatened, and to not say anymore. And so then the expert kind of said like, hey, like I don't want to talk about this anymore, please respect my decision that to not reach out to me again. And but Susan later on did reach out again, and eventually, like, and he responded, like, and eventually he became like, was willing to testify, and he wrote like an affidavit saying, no, like what I said before was wrong, like this information, like I didn't know this information here. So he, like, they changed it, so the cell phone tower data, like it was out, like, which is what helped Adnan or helped Jay's statements to convict Adnan, and so those are out. So anyone who's a guilter, who's like saying like the evidence that you have, if you believe in the state's case, the expert who proved it, went back, changed his mind, says he does not agree with that anymore, he was wrong. You have nothing to stand on except Jay's lies. And then like they all went out to dinner afterward, and Adnan's younger brother had introduced himself and said that was his brother, and the cell phone expert apologized and like was almost crying and saying that like it's because of him that his brother's in jail.
Well, you would feel so bad.
Yeah, I would too. And then, but his brother was just like, no, like don't you ever feel that way though? Like, that other people were misled and throughout this whole case. So like his brother was like trying to say like he didn't blame him. I'm like, I would want to do that same, like, but I would blame you too. That I'm like, it is because of you, but it's also like, I get it.
They all have like the most like amazing attitude. I mean, Rabia, who's not like a relative, but might as well be at this point. Like she's like a pit bull about this. Like she's naming names, but Adnan and his family all have like this really like healthy attitude towards everything. Like, yes, this is wrong. We're going to keep trying.
Well, Adnan would even say too that he blames himself because he's like, yeah, there are things like I shouldn't have done that. Like I shouldn't have gone out to do. And I feel bad though too. It's like no, it's like
you come on, dude, you smoked weed with your friends in high school.
Went out, like you party, you hung out and you kind of did some things that like an average high schooler would do though. Like you didn't know that like someone that your friend would be murdered and this would be a pendant. Like, so I feel bad that like, he blames himself for that. But I'd say that, yeah, you hung out with some wrong people like Jay that like would cause more problems. And so like, I get like that there is there is some responsibility, but no one expects your friend to be murdered. Like,
no,
it's yeah. So I feel bad for him too. And I think my last thing that I have to say on this is that a silver lining from what with everything that Adnan has been through and like all the podcasts about it, I think that that helped wake people up to all these injustices. It helped me, like I didn't know about this until so to all of these injustices, and that there are people out there like Bob Ruff of the Truth and Justice podcast, like who now like he got into it from this, and he just started talking about Serial, and then moved on. Like they're doing more cases. He's been able to get a guy at his conviction overturned and released from prison, and it was a murder conviction. Like he was able to help prove it. So like that, as I'm just trying to think of like anything to say that like as much as it sucks, and I wish you that didn't happen to you. I'm hoping that the tragedy that he's gone through has been able to like, hey, you're indirectly helping other people who are going through similar things, that like that word is getting out there, and other people are getting released from prison and have similar stories. And so it's just like it's still not like not enough, but it's just like if you never went to prison, there are so many things that wouldn't have happened because of that. And hope that like but I don't know, like, but I still feel so bad. But the state also had 30 days from his release to decide whether they're going to retry him. And according to Sarah Koenig on Serial, she said that it seems unlikely that they would do this. I think it was on Serial, which was relief though. That like, so I'm hoping that they are going to just leave him be and not try to do anything again. But yeah, so I don't know.
I saw one today that said Marilyn Mosby, who's the state attorney, is that right? Prosecutor.
Yeah.
She said like they're waiting on some last round of DNA, like I think it's touch DNA results. And she said as long as that doesn't come back with Adnan's DNA, like she would
wait, what DNA? Like on what though? Because I'm like,
I think
his prints were there, like
on Hae's clothing or something. I don't know.
That seems kind of, I mean, I guess I understand that like maybe you would because they're there, but like there probably would be other DNA too, or like she was there at school, like if she was talking to Adnan, like I don't know, that just seems
right.
I guess like there still wouldn't be enough evidence hopefully to like convict him again, but I guess I get that like, oh, I don't know, that's just still not even enough really to like try him again because
well, no, I mean their case is ruined at this point. They can't use the cell phone data, like that entire thing is out. None of that works except for maybe who they were talking to at certain times, but whatever. And then Jay has just made himself such like a terrible witness. So
with this rap sheet that like I don't know if he'd be able to to do anything or like convince a jury. I would hope, but I don't know.
Oh, if they tried him again and I was Adnan's lawyer, if I got Jay on the stand, I would just make him read out the statements he made in various interviews.
Yeah, here's all of the different things that you
right. Yeah, and just like, okay,
said.
jury, do you believe this guy? Go ahead. So like, yeah, and that's it. That was the only stuff they actually had on him was Jay and the cell phone towers.
Yeah. Judge Law went to get Taco Bell. I'm so jealous. I'm hungry too. I
know.
want that. But yeah, so I guess if they do go to trial, they've like debunked so many things from it that they really don't have anything. So for all you guilters out there, and I really want to talk to my one friend who was like a guilter before too, because I want to know what his opinion is.
Right.
But like, if for all you guys out there, then I just don't know what you're like. The Reddit I should see where you were looking at before too, though, because I'm just really, it's gonna make me mad, but I'm just really curious as to like what I think a lot of them are just still using old information that was debunked. So
oh yeah,
like,
absolutely they are. No, I mean I think it's at this point it's willful ignorance. There's so much stuff these people have dug up and debunked and
yeah. So I just so there's no point arguing with them because I'm like, no, you're too
right.
stupid to like actually pay attention to things that are going on. So I don't believe you. So we can actually end it with this tweet here that made me so happy to see from Rabia. Oh, if I can get it where it won't. There we go. And put it on screen. Rabia and Adnan. So then, I don't know whose house they are, but like just out, free, unshackled, smiling. So it made my day when I saw that earlier.
That is so cool. Yeah.
So I really
what
hope
a story.
he stays out, and I hope that they reopen the case and find the actual murder. And they have there were two people. One thing we didn't go over either was that they have two suspects now that were suspects in the past, or that were like known in the past, but they weren't like looked into as suspects. But now, because someone even said had motive and threatened to kill Hae, like verbally threatened to kill her.
Which is like, who wanted to kill Hae and why?
I really, and I know it's like an ongoing investigation, so they can't talk, but like I really want to know, like, is it someone that we know about before, or is it just like someone totally unknown? And they knew about this, so I don't know.
Well, one of them is in prison. We don't know his name, but we know he's in prison for sexual assault right now, which would mean that he's a felon, which would mean that his DNA should be in the system.
Yeah.
So, fingers crossed. Because I just want to know who did it, like for real.
Me too. Yeah, like with a non-free, like that's but then now we need like to get justice for her, and I really want to know, like, I hope they can solve this crime, and with the spotlight on them, like hopefully that they actually do it.
Right.
But okay, I think that's everything. I know that we didn't even go through like all of but it's like I don't think we can go through the entire timeline. Everyone's done like hours and hours of podcasting and things.
No, you would need like an infographic that's animated.
Everything. Yeah,
much.
But we got a good deal of it. But yeah, I'm so happy for Adnan. I hope everything turns out well, and I hope that we can actually find out what happened to Hae, and we'll see. But thank you guys for watching, and thank you, Juliet, for being as excited about this. But you told me about it too, and you texted me. I was just like, "Holy crap!" Because you just started. Do you know who Adnan Syed is? I'm like, why would she be bringing this up? Why would good news? Like if she's bringing him up, though, did something happen? So,
yes,
I was like so excited. My hopes were up, and I was like, "Don't do it, don't do." Because like with the hearings in the past, I was just getting hopeful, and then I was like,
so devastating every time.
And then even Rabia too. And I was listening to her, like the latest thing was she was talking about like like I'm just waiting, like even after it was vacated, the conviction was vacated. Like she's just like, well, we'll see. Like I don't want to celebrate too soon. And like I get it. I'm sure like, you've been doing this for decades now, and
right.
So it's just it's so heartwarming. But yeah, thank you, and thank you everyone else. I need to I'm just gonna use the TMR credits because they're more fun. But yeah, have a good night, everyone.
All right, bye.
Bye. And credits.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production is known by the state of California to cause unregulated ideation that may be harmful to bureaucrats. Association with the following individuals or tacos is strictly prohibited. Apropos of nothing, I was just wondering how would you feel about another pandemic? Your president is in full control of his mental faculties. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.